Can people please take their seats? Thank you. The sitting is now open. The first item of business this morning is the debate on the report entitled Transnational Repression as a Growing Threat to the Rule of Law and Human Rights. That is document 15787, presented by Sir Christopher Chope on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. In order to finish by about 11:20, I will interrupt the list of speakers at around 11 o'clock, 11:05, to allow time for the reply and the vote. And I call now Sir Christopher as rapporteur. You have 7 minutes to present the report, and then you will have a further 3 minutes to reply to the debate at the end. Christopher.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that transnational repression is indeed a growing threat to the rule of law and human rights. And this was brought home to us in the United Kingdom with the Litvinenko case and the Salisbury poisonings. My report, the draft resolution and the draft recommendation were adopted unanimously by the Legal Affairs Committee at its meeting in Cyprus. On Wednesday, Amendment 1 was accepted unanimously, and I thank Elena Kamenko for that improvement to the resolution. Amendment 2 and Amendment 3, proposed by members of the Turkish delegation, were rejected overwhelmingly by a lot more than 2/3 at the committee on Wednesday, so I hope that there won't be any attempt to resurrect those failed amendments today. The Council of Europe and this Assembly and the Committee of Ministers need to recognise the gravity of the threat and take action. For that reason, paragraph 17 of the draft resolution sets out a series of action points, including 17.6, targeted sanctions on perpetrators and enablers of transnational repression. Paragraph 21 invites the court to engage and ensure, and I quote, that there is no protection gap against transnational repression committed under the Convention legal process. Against this background, it is, to me, a matter of great regret that one of the 46 national delegations to this Assembly doesn't agree with this report and is in denial about its own country's active engagement in transnational repression. I refer to Turkey. The human rights organization Freedom House has identified 5 countries as the most prolific perpetrators of transnational repression. Only one of those is a Council of Europe member, namely Turkey. If the Council of Europe is to lead by example, we must not be in denial about the rotten apple in our own midst before we start lecturing the rest of the world. Paragraph 6 and paragraph 16 spell out the problem in some detail. And I'm going to refer particularly to paragraph 16 because that has a specific recommendation, and obviously there's the proposal by the Turkish delegation to remove it from the report. But paragraph 16, the Assembly specifically calls upon Turkey to end its intimidation of Bülent Kenes, to recognise and respect the decision of the Swedish Supreme Court and curtail its policy of using its veto on Sweden's membership of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as a tool of transnational repression. And we know that there's a NATO summit coming up next month. And let us hope that Turkey does indeed do what it was suggesting it might do, which is to remove its veto and allow the Swedes to accede to NATO, which is a policy which is universally supported by members of this assembly. It's supported by all other members of NATO. And I think it's just unacceptable that an individual in Sweden should be being used as a pawn in this battle between the Erdogan government and those people who are concerned about the rights of individuals, ex-Turkish citizens who've sought refuge overseas for their own safety. So let's hope that we make some progress on that when we get to the NATO summit. But the other paragraph to which the members of the Turkish delegation took exception is paragraph 6. And paragraph 6 defines a bit more exactly what's been happening in Turkey and the way in which Turkey has been using various tools of national repression and transnational repression against its own people. And the last autumn, the International Journalists Organization produced a really good report, Weaponization of Anti-Terror Financing Measures, the Turkish government's new transnational repression tool to silence its critics. And if you look at the content of that report, Mr. President, it's actually very disturbing indeed. And so I can't summarize the whole of that report in paragraph 6, but paragraph 6 it contains quite a lot of the same content as is in that report. And what we don't find a situation where members of the Turkish delegation to this assembly say, gosh, there must be an issue here, we must start holding our own government to account. Quite the reverse. They seem to be in denial and blaming everybody but themselves. And I think that that is an unacceptable way in which to proceed. So I hope that this assembly today will unanimously support this report and the recommendations and the resolution. And in so doing, will send a strong message to the newly elected Turkish government that it may have been really newly elected, but it doesn't mean that it can behave in an autocratic way towards its own citizens, whether they be at home or abroad.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Now, we move on to the speakers on behalf of political groups. Can I just check, is Mr. Gatlin here? Yes? Very good. You're next, sir. La parole est avec vous.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, je veux dire toute l'admiration et le respect que j'ai pour le travail qui a été conduit par Sir Christopher Sharp dans cet excellent rapport, qui est un sujet, je crois, essentiel parce qu'il recoupe énormément de thématiques associées aux droits humains, à l'état de droit, et que cette question des répressions transnationales, justement, traverse un certain nombre de sujets que nous avons d'ailleurs eu l'occasion ces dernières années d'aborder, mais de manière parcellaire. En janvier 2022, vous m'avez fait l'honneur d'adopter très largement une résolution pour en finir avec les disparitions forcées sur le territoire du Conseil de l'Europe. Et c'est quelque chose, effectivement, d'extrêmement important et qu'on retrouve d'ailleurs cité en référence, c'est-à-dire que de plus en plus, nous avons effectivement des problèmes entre des pays membres du Conseil de l'Europe. Notamment dans ce rapport, il est fait état de la part de la Turquie ou de l'Azerbaïdjan de pratiques qui ne sont pas conformes à nos normes, qui sont celles de l'Europe ou des normes de droit international. Mais nous avons aussi une montée en puissance de la répression transnationale opérée par des États tiers. De fait, la Fédération de Russie est aujourd'hui un État tiers, au même titre que le Bélarus. Le rapport a aussi cette qualité, c'est de parler d'autres acteurs, et notamment la politique coercitive transnationale menée par le régime de la Chine populaire sur nos territoires. De plus en plus de cas, et le rapporteur, M. Schaap, fait état de la situation de postes de police illégaux au Royaume-Uni. Je voudrais simplement développer un peu et ne pas prendre que l'exemple du Royaume-Uni. Une ONG très connue désormais, basée à Madrid, qui s'appelle Safeguard Defenders, fait régulièrement des rapports et des états. Et je vérifiais hier soir dans les documents, nous avons au moins 18 pays membres du Conseil de l'Europe qui sont concernés par la présence de ces postes de police illégaux de la Chine, et il y aurait au moins 46 de ces postes. Je dis ça parce que nous avons tendance très souvent dans nos rapports à partir sur des bases juridiques, concrètes, sur la base d'arrêts ou d'exemples, mais je crois qu'il faut aussi donner un contexte beaucoup plus large. Un des autres aspects qui est extrêmement important dans ce rapport, c'est l'usage abusif qu'il est fait des recours, notamment policiers, à travers les mécanismes d'Interpol et notamment le dépôt de notices rouges. Là encore, nous avons procédé ces dernières années plusieurs fois à des auditions des responsables. Il y a là véritablement un problème et un scandale parce que certains pays abusent. Et quand vous êtes dans un train et que vous tirez le signal d'alarme, eh bien, quand c'est justifié, il n'y a pas de problème, on vous met une médaille, je termine. Quand vous faites un abus, vous êtes condamné, vous avez une sanction. Aujourd'hui, il n'y a aucune politique de sanction de la part des gens qui abusent. Pour toutes ces raisons, et au nom du groupe ALDE, nous voterons bien évidemment en faveur de ce rapport. Je vous remercie.
Dear
colleagues, back in 2021, when I submitted this draft motion, I had in mind many extrajudicial killings or attempts committed by Russia and what we could do about that. It is an issue that strikes at the very core of our values, transnational repressions orchestrated by autocratic governments. These repressions have become an alarming trend in recent years, and it is imperative that we take stand against them. The urgency of this matter was recognized gradually when a series of attacks worldwide, most notably the Salisbury attack, sent shockwaves through our communities. This attack, attributed to the Russian Federation, served as another wake-up call, revealing the lengths to which some governments would go to silence dissident and exert control beyond their borders. In our pursuit of a comprehensive understanding of transnational repressions, we owe a debt of gratitude to Sir Christopher Chope. His unwavering dedication and insightful resolution have provided us with a valuable toolbox of steps to counteract this disturbing phenomenon. Today, we must build upon his work and take action. The Russian Federation stands out as one of the most egregious examples of a state-sponsored program aimed at pursuing dissidents abroad. The targeted assassinations carried out under this program are horrifying. It is from this ground, steeped in tragedy and injustice, that our report takes flight. We must launch a comprehensive effort to address transnational repressions head-on for the sake of the victims, their families, and the preservation of our fundamental principles. The report not only sheds light on the gravity of transnational repressions, but also proposes concrete measures to counteract and deter such actions. We must emphasize the importance of international cooperation, sharing intelligence, and holding perpetrators accountable. No autocratic governments should be allowed to act with impunity and trample upon the rights of individuals beyond their borders. Moreover, we must support and protect those who find themselves targeted by transnational repressions. We must offer shelter to dissidents, provide legal assistance, and ensure their voices are heard. By standing together, we can create a network of resilience that shields those who fight for freedom and justice from the reach of oppressive regimes. In conclusion, the fight against transnational repression is not only a matter of principle, it is the test of our collective resolve to protect the values we hold dear. Let us remember the victims, honor their courage, and work tirelessly to counteract the use of this instrument by autocratic governments. Together, we can build a future where no one lives in fear, where justice prevails, and where the spirit of freedom transcends all the borders. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Monsieur Mathieu.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, le projet de résolution adossé à ce rapport s'ouvre sur l'assassinat du journaliste saoudien Jamal Khashoggi. C'est pour moi l'occasion d'exprimer l'infamie de voir mon pays, la France, recevoir 8 jours durant le commanditaire de cet assassinat, Mohamed Ben Salman. Je tiens ici à faire part de la plus vive réprobation de mon groupe à toute forme de répression politique, d'autant plus lorsqu'elle est le fruit d'une coopération active entre gouvernements qui prétendent adhérer aux principes fondamentaux de la démocratie et de l'état de droit. C'est le cas de la Turquie, cité dans le rapport et dans les interventions que nous avons entendues aussi jusqu'ici, mais c'est le cas également du Royaume-Uni, malheureusement absent du dit rapport. Premièrement, en ce qui concerne la Turquie, nous savons toutes et tous que la Turquie ne respecte pas ses obligations concernant les droits humains, l'abolition de la torture ou encore la liberté d'opinion. Dans sa dynamique d'éradication des minorités, et notamment du peuple kurde, ce pays pratique les arrestations arbitraires et la torture. Sur le plan international, elle a néanmoins réussi à faire inscrire le Parti des travailleurs du Kurdistan sur la liste des organisations terroristes. Cette accusation de terrorisme, d'ailleurs, a collé à toute forme d'opposition politique au gouvernement islamo-fasciste du président Erdogan est utilisée en permanence. Cette accusation permet de nombreux abus, notamment dans l'usage des notices Interpol et des demandes d'extradition de réfugiés politiques. En conséquence, le PKK ne devrait pas être sur une telle liste d'organisations terroristes. J'ai d'ailleurs une pensée pour son fondateur, Abdullah Öcalan, qui est emprisonné depuis désormais 24 ans et est à l'isolement depuis déjà de nombreuses années. Les ONG qui défendent les droits humains ont déjà alerté sur la pratique régulière de la torture en Turquie, en général, et en particulier contre Abdullah Öcalan. Je soutiens donc sans réserve, au nom de mon groupe, l'ensemble des Turcs qui combattent pour leur droit à vivre dans une démocratie, ainsi que la volonté du peuple kurde à vivre libre. Mon deuxième point est pour faire part d'un étonnement. Il n'est nulle part fait mention du cas de Julian Assange, chose que je trouve très surprenante de la part de notre honorable collègue rapporteur. Il est pourtant avéré que Julian Assange est victime d'une répression transnationale violente de la part du gouvernement américain, en coopération active avec le gouvernement britannique. Ainsi, ces conditions de détention portent atteinte à sa dignité et à sa santé. Payer de sa vie le droit d'informer est absolument indigne dans les pays démocratiques. Je tiens donc ici, au nom de mon groupe, à condamner fermement la répression qui s'abat sur Julian Assange, qui est devenu un symbole central de la répression transnationale, et je souhaite qu'aucun des États membres, et particulièrement le Royaume-Uni, n'accède aux demandes du gouvernement américain. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Merci. And now to Lord Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair and members. Just a word to add support from our group to what's just been said about the case of Julian Assange, and also to do it from the point of view of a speaker not only for my group, but for my country. It is scandalous. It needs to be dealt with in a humane and humanitarian way. But I am very grateful to Sir Christopher for bringing together this report and so many instances and categories, many of which one knew about in bits and pieces through the news that had filtered through to us, but brought together here in a compendious way and a useful way. Of course, we'd all known about Jamal Khashoggi and Alexander Litvinenko and the Skripals, and they've been mentioned already. but the wide variety and the number of those who in different categories have suffered from transnational repression makes this a useful tool, and I do hope that we will recommend it and accept it in due course. I would add an emphasis myself from work I do in the House of Lords on one of its select committees, the far-reaching consequences of cyber terrorism, of using the internet to reach, affect, infect, and bring danger into our national institutions via the activities that on the dark net, on the one hand, but also rogue elements favored by their states on the other. So we must, first of all, recognize that this is a timely paper, and it's quite right to seek the support of the Council of Europe, quite right to make a recommendation to the Committee of Ministers that this is the time when something needs to be done to address what is quite clearly a prevailing problem. Solidarity across Europe, let me just, this is a trite truism, solidarity across Europe is necessary because together we are stronger than the sum of our parts. Well, we know that, that's why we are here. Indeed, it's the best way to control our borders, for the control of borders is not just a matter of stopping boats and illegal migration. Taking control of our borders is best done when together as a continent we define the threats and together take action. And for once, don't subject ourselves to the tyranny that we heard from just behind me here in earlier debates. So instead of sloganized, get Brexit done, it's the 7th anniversary of the referendum that got Brexit done. Instead of the sloganized, stop our boats as if a few boats in the channel, for all that they raise problems, are the only way of dealing with controlling our borders, I would say to Sir Christopher, who is known to be both in favor of stopping boats and also on the public record as being in support of Brexit, that his report is fine, but it's half the response to the problem he identifies.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker in the speakers on behalf of political groups is Madam Jasko.
Dear colleagues, of course, we welcome this report, but I want to say that still I lack something in this report, is understanding what is actually the definition of transnational repression. I'm saying this because, in fact, there are so many people around all the world who are suffering from repressions of being in opposition to their governments. So many foreign journalists, in general journalists, are suffering because of their will to speak the truth, to find the truth. And then it's very hard to find in the international law the definition, what is this transnational repression. And I think this is something that we could be working on here. And when we study the cases that were mentioned by some of our colleagues and also in this report, we see that many of these people, they lack protection, they lack instruments for their defense, their families are also often targeted by this repression and they lack protection. So we could be thinking about what tools could we provide so that these people have more protection. And if we look at the Russian aggression and what Russia did to so many Ukrainians in occupied territories, and for instance in Crimea, we know once there is Ukrainian passport and this person gets into the Russian prison, whether he's a Crimean Tatar, these people will face so much violence. Is it transnational repression? I think it is. So we could work more on this definition and the tools we can provide. I'm glad that this report also mentioned sanctions on those who actually commit the crimes, to imprison these people, to put violence on these people. But I want to call, in the end of my speech, not only for some tools, but also for some more involvement on non-governmental sector who could be helping us to define what these transnational repressions are, and also to run more educational campaigns on how it is when people are targeted and they are not being able to defend themselves. And there are so many of them around all the world. One more time, great report, but we need definitions and we need some tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we move on to the general speakers, and Madam Bilali Zendel. Is she here? No. Mr. Vardanyan?
I'm here.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the reporter. The report we are discussing is very topical. Topical because despite the fact that transnational repression is a famous phenomenon from political perspective, but from legal perspective, from the perspective of 21st century legal thinking, it should be still described, and we need really the explanation of what we are speaking about. That's why I agree with those orators who already said that we need precise definition of what we are calling transnational repression. For sure, we understood perfectly well that we are dealing with the new phenomenon which is used by several countries to be rather pure and clean in their democracies, but simultaneously commit an outrages out of their territories. But I do believe that the countries who are members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Council of Europe as such should be as democratic at home as they are democratic abroad, because it's impossible to be democracy in one issues and not democratic in other issues. I remember we prepared a very interesting report, and Mr. Catalan is a reporter on the enforced disappearances here. We raised very important issues, especially concerning the new manifestation of the enforced disappearance in the territory of the Council of Europe. And we are addressing the issues of the special enforced disappearance during the wartime, when the people actually were captured by the adversary forces and should get the POW or another protective status, but instead of this, we have been disappeared. And this is a new phenomenon, and it's a little bit strange. We have a lot of new technologies which can fix the moment of capturing. We have the videos, we have the evidences, but simultaneously we have no legal tools to protect their rights. And this should be somehow be addressed. I cannot touch upon the issue of transnational or border abductions, when very often the people are actually abducting from the border to be used as a tool for hostage negotiations. And from this perspective, I agree with those who said that unfortunately this report is necessary, but it's not full. And several cases, as Julian Assange cases concerning Great Britain and United Kingdom, as well as Lapshin case, who was abducted in Belarus and afterwards extradited, in brackets, to Azerbaijan and afterwards extradited to Israel, was one of the examples of such kind of activities. But these kind of cases are not covered, unfortunately. For sure, I would like to emphasize once again that the report is topical, but there are something to do. First of all, we should understand what are the definitions, and only after the definition we should go ahead with such kind of discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Jafarov.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have to mention that one of the most egregious examples of the transnational repression, which this report failed to mention is based on ethnic cleansing. The people of Azerbaijan have suffered from ethnic cleansing, massacre, genocide, military occupation, armed conflicts in the last 2 centuries. And ethnic cleansing committed against the people of Azerbaijan in 1905 and 6, in 1918 and 21, and in 1948-51, in 1987 and 91, could be characterized as by its systemic nature, committed by the state authorities of Armenia, because it was state sponsorship. And I could give another example. My colleague from Armenia, he mentioned that about hostage negotiation. I have to remind him that on April of this year, 2 Azerbaijani soldiers, Akshin Babirov and Hüseyin Akhundov, they went missing near Armenian border. They were captured, and the footage of the videos, we already circulated those videos to you. It's showing that local Armenians and military personnel, they tortured them. And recently, they staged a court, and they gave him a fake verdict and sentenced Azerbaijani military personnel 20 years in prison. And this is another indication of the hatred, ethnical hatred against us, Azerbaijanis, and also our country. Finally, I have to mention that yesterday's report regarding the Lachur checkpoint, it was unnecessarily, untimely, and biased report. Why I'm saying that? Because PACE yesterday missed a historical opportunity to bring Azerbaijani and Armenian MPs together, at least to bring peace between us here, not to make us more enemy. And if we come back again to the Lachin border checkpoint, it should not be viewed as the pilot project, because Prime Minister of the Pashinyan and Armenia took obligation to restore Zengezur corridor, to completely withdraw Armenian military personnel from the internationally recognized territory of Azerbaijan. And so far they haven't. So from here, I'm calling from our colleagues, I'm calling from the PACE to call Armenians to release our military personnel and not use them as a tool for some kind of negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Mr. Evstatiou? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to understand the logic of how we are maintaining these meetings, because I remember that a couple of sessions before, when somebody from our members addressing the issue, which is not covered by this topic, he was immediately interrupted. Now we have the case that the person actually who has no opportunity to have a speech yesterday used his speech to address another topic, and nobody interrupting him. I would like to understand where are the legal definitions, what we are discussing, and what is the topic of discussion. Thank you.
I agree that Mr. Jafarov was not in line with the subject of this debate, and I propose to leave it there for the moment. Mr. Evstatiou?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish, first of all, to congratulate our good friend, Christopher Chope, for his excellent report. The issue before us is indeed a worrying development, one that is, of course, linked to the state of democracy and stability in Europe. New and existing threats have emerged or resurfaced as a result of mistrust between states or within states and attempts to silence opposing voices to the established system or mainstream narrative are on the rise. This report is interlinked with other matters of the Committee of Legal Affairs and Human Rights has dealt with, more particularly in rightly documents transnational repression techniques and legal loopholes that have allowed states and non-state actors to decisively intervene outside their territory to stop, silence, or restrict political opponents, human rights activists, and whistleblowers. The same manipulation applies with respect to the red alert notices and the abuse of extradition proceedings on unfounded or sometimes fabricated allegations of terrorism or suspicion of membership to criminal organizations. We must do our utmost to prevent these acts and take necessary measures to ensure adequate safeguards and accountability mechanisms are put in place to end all forms of transnational repression, particularly the instrumentalization of extradition requests and surveillance practices. At the same time, we have to assist and support human rights defenders dissociate themselves and break free from any authoritarian regime and find alternative ways to operate and fund their activities, as has been the case of Russia, Belarus, Turkey, Afghanistan, and many other countries, mainly in the developing world. These regimes do misuse anti-money laundering measures and the countering of financing of terrorism regulations, amongst other tools of transnational repression. We fully support the draft resolution before us, well as a draft recommendation, and hope it will pave the way for more concrete action from member states, not to engage in such awful acts, take into account relevant decisions and case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Stier? Is he here? No. Madam Yildiz?
Colleagues, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, I would like to express my disappointment regarding Mr. Mathieu's accusations. Firstly, because I would like to remind you that a month ago we had our elections, and with the rate of 49.5%, the elections advanced to the second round, and in the second round, the election resulted with the vast majority, and our president re-elected with the vast majority. And regarding these points, I need to emphasize that. Please respect the decision of people of Turkey. Please respect democracy and rule of law. And with such accusations will not be serving democracy anymore. And secondly, I need to again express my disappointment regarding the rapporteur's points, because he mentioned Turkey for several times, while he is not mentioning other countries so frequently, and this makes us feel biased about the partiality of this report. That's why we have an objection to this report. Regarding this point, as you all know, in 15 July 2016, Turkey has suffered from the failed coup attempt, which directly targeted the elected president, Turkish parliament, and Turkish democracy. Unfortunately, we have destructive marks of this coup attempt in our parliament too. FETÖ even targeted our democracy and our parliament. And while regarding these points in the mind, in the aftermath of the coup attempt, Turkish courts established that Fethullahist terrorist organization has attempted to overthrow the government with abundant evidence on the formation, structure, and funding of FETÖ. Turkish democracy survived from this heinous coup attempt thanks to its resilience and thanks to Turkish people who took to the streets for democracy on the night of coup attempt. I'm very upset with the fact that this report fails to acknowledge that the fact that FETÖ is the perpetrator of the coup attempt, and Turkey combats this terrorist organization within the framework of rule of law and its international human rights obligations. Member states must work in cooperation and collaboration against terrorism. Sadly, this report does the opposite and undermines Turkey's efforts against terrorism. Moreover, I would like to express my deepest disappointment regarding the side event that took place in the premises of this assembly. The title of the event was "The Democratic Institutions and Rule of Law in Turkey," and hosted by our colleagues in this assembly. One of the participants of this event is a member of the Fethullahist terrorist organization. This participant, a Turkish citizen, convicted of being a member of an armed terrorist organization by the first degree and appellate courts. I think you all would agree that neither Turkey nor the PACE has anything to learn from the people who affiliated with terrorist organization. On the contrary, such an initiative hurts the credibility of the Assembly and Council of Europe indeed. Despite all our attempts and initiatives...
I'm sorry, you have to bring your remarks to a close.
Thank you. Thank you.
I now call Mr. Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. President. To follow Ms. Yield, I just gently point out that winning an election doesn't mean human rights are dissolved. It means that those rights carry on, whether somebody's won the election or not. The issues are about the right of people to express themselves, the right of journalists to be able to report what is going on. I welcome the report that we've got in front of us today, and I particularly want to draw attention to the issue of the freedom of speech and the rights of journalists across this continent and indeed across the world. Because if we do not protect the right of journalists to be able to freely report what is going on, freely report about abuse of human rights, freely report about corruption, freely report about different political points of view all across this continent, then we're moving into a very dangerous and very dark place. I want to draw attention particularly to a case that is going on in the courts in Britain at the moment, and that is of Julian Assange. Julian Assange, the head of WikiLeaks, released a lot of information telling us the truth about so much of what was going on around the world. He is a whistleblower. He is somebody that has told an awful lot of, given a lot of information out that many governments did not want to be given out. That is what effective and good journalists do. Democracy is about holding government and power to account. That is exactly what Julian Assange has done. He was eventually threatened with arrest. He sought asylum and stayed in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for a number of years until he was eventually arrested and has been in a maximum security prison in Britain now for 4 years. His health is very much at risk and he's threatened with extradition to the United States under the Espionage Act. If he's extradited to the USA, he will face effectively a death sentence of a prison sentence of over 140 years. That will kill him. And it will frighten every effective, real journalist all around the world into the dangers of telling the truth about what very powerful companies, organizations, global corporations and states actually do. And so I hope the maximum pressure can be put on the British government and the US government to end its appeal, which could end with Julian Assange being sent to the USA. And in closing, I just think we should, for one moment, just think of Daniel Ellsberg, who recently died. Daniel Ellsberg was vilified at the time he told the truth about Vietnam, was vilified because of what he had done, allegedly releasing state secrets. And in January of this year, as he was dying, he spoke at an event that I was at on Zoom at the National Press Club in Washington, giving his absolute support to the campaign for the freedom of Julian Assange, that he can carry on his work as the most effective investigative reporter perhaps the world has ever seen.
Thank you. Mr. Merezhko? We have no Mr. Merezhko?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Very good.
Dear friends, the report doesn't take into consideration the biggest threat when it comes to transnational repression, the threat which comes from the Chinese Communist Party. In the text of the draft resolution, China is mentioned only once and without any details. According to the NGO Freedom House, I quote, "China conducts the most sophisticated, global and comprehensive campaign of transnational repression in the world," end of quote. This organization, Freedom House, also mentions that, I quote, "The CCP targets entire ethnic and religious groups, including Uyghurs and Tibetans," end of quote. Sometimes I get an impression that we're afraid of the CCP and are reluctant to raise the issue of the genocide against the Uyghurs and Tibetans. Yes, China is not a member state of the Council of Europe, but the victims of the transnational repression live in our countries. Regrettably, the report doesn't mention Chinese secret overseas police stations as a new tool of transnational repression, which have been discovered recently in many European countries. What is also missing in this report is a recommendation to the Council of Europe member states to terminate treaties on extradition with the PRC and Hong Kong. It's important because these treaties might be an instrument for transnational repression. As for the definition of transnational repression, we understand it as a kind of state terrorism. This is exactly the nature of totalitarian and authoritarian states. These states are aggressive and don't stop at their borders. They target in different ways dissidents living abroad. In this regard, all totalitarian regimes are the same. Unfortunately, contemporary technology creates additional opportunities for transnational repressions. We should give an exact legal definition of the transnational repression and distinguish different forms of this kind of repression. Overall, the report is good, it's interesting, it's important, but I still have doubts whether to vote for or not to vote because of this wrong focus. It seems sometimes that we have chosen as a weapon boy Turkey instead of concentrating on the major threat when it comes to transnational repression, the CCP. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Sanchez Garcia. No. Madam Hernandez Ramos. Yes.
Díaz. La represión transnacional salió a la luz como un fenómeno global a partir del trágico suceso de 2018 en que el periodista saudí Jamal Khashoggi fue asesinado y desmembrado en el consulado de Arabia Saudita en Estambul. Como parlamentaria mexicana, tengo la obligación moral de levantar la voz ante el fenómeno de la represión transnacional, en especial porque asociaciones como Reporteros Sin Fronteras ha considerado que México es el segundo país más peligroso del mundo para ser periodista. Además, apenas a inicios de este año en Tlaxcala, México, la prensa local reportó que un supuesto militar había amedrentado a un grupo de periodistas que acudían a cubrir actividades a la gobernadora en el municipio de Tlaxco. En muchas partes del mundo, las personas están luchando valientemente contra la represión transnacional. A menudo enfrentan intimidación, amenazas y violencia, pero continúan resistiendo porque creen en la importancia de la libertad y la justicia. Es nuestro deber respaldarlos y proporcionarles el marco jurídico necesario para salvaguardar sus derechos fundamentales y que puedan ejercer sus libertades de pensamiento y de difusión de ideas y planteamientos. La importancia de proteger y salvaguardar derechos frente a los actos de represión transnacional radica, como lo han resuelto diversos tribunales constitucionales en el mundo, en que la construcción de una democracia deliberativa requiere facilitar la máxima circulación de las ideas. La represión transnacional se manifiesta de muchas formas, desde la censura en línea y la vigilancia masiva hasta la persecución de disidentes políticos, activistas de derechos humanos y periodistas. Estas prácticas autoritarias no solo violan diversos derechos fundamentales e inderogables de las personas atacadas, sino que son una amenaza para el Estado de Derecho, para la base de nuestras democracias y para la seguridad nacional de los estados donde esas personas viven y han encontrado refugio. La propuesta de resolución ante esta Asamblea señala que entre los países más prolíficos en perpetrar actos de represión transnacional está Tayikistán, país al que recientemente el gobierno mexicano aceptó vender la aeronave que usaba el presidente para transportarse, operación que se realizó en opacidad, sin rendición de cuentas, porque la información se clasificó como reservada por razones de seguridad. El autoritarismo se aprovecha de cualquier espacio minúsculo para acrecentar su poder. Como parlamentarios, no podemos ser espectadores pasivos mientras la represión transnacional se intensifica y se expande. Debemos ser la voz de quienes han sido silenciados y asegurarnos de que sus historias sean escuchadas. La represión transnacional no respeta fronteras y, por tanto, la respuesta debe ser igualmente transnacional. Celebro los acuerdos alcanzados para colaborar estrechamente en la colaboración y elaboración de leyes y políticas que protejan el Estado de Derecho y los derechos humanos, así como para responsabilizar a aquellos que perpetran la represión. Es cuanto. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. And now we move to Mr. Goncharenko.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank Rapporteur for a great job done, and especially the part about transnational repressions and killings organized by Russian Federation, which is so striking, starting from Novichok and Salisbury, coming to the killings organized by Kadyrov and other Russian FSB people. That is really striking. But what is really transnational and what is the next phase of Russian transnational aggression is use and possible use and blackmail with a mass destruction weaponry. That's what we see today. Once again, Russia deployed nuclear weaponry in Belarus. By this, it's the end of non-proliferation policy in the world. Because who is the next aggressor? Who is the next tyrant who will be presented by Putin with a nuclear weaponry? Ayatollah, Assad, who will be the next? And it's a great threat. But Russia itself is threatening the world with the nukes. By the way, just yesterday, top Russian propagandist Solovyov threatened Romania to be destroyed with the nukes. There is one more country which is in their list. But definitely the most active their threats are against my country, Ukraine. And it's not just using of nuclear weaponry, but also possible attack on occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. And Russia already mined it. Exactly what they did in Kakhovka. And Ukraine was addressing the world saying they are preparing the catastrophe of a planetary scale. And now it happened. And now they're again doing this in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So I want to address all of you. We need to react now. Or maybe there will be no sense for our next meeting in October. Will we have a possibility to meet? Because radiation doesn't know the borders and limits, and we need to react today. I want to say thank you very much to Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal in the United States of America, who sponsored yesterday the bill to US Congress about the fact that if Russia will go nukes in Ukraine, or if Russia will organize attack or explosion on a nuclear power plant, that will be a war against NATO, against everybody in the world. And if the United States is doing this in the thousands and thousands of kilometers from here, I address all of you, Germany, United Kingdom, France, other countries, to make the same decisions in your parliament, that if Russia will go nukes, if Russia will blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or any other nuclear power plant in Ukraine, that will be the result of this, will be a war against Russian Federation. It should be stopped, because that will threaten the security of every person on the planet. Let's do it, and let's stop Russian blackmail like this. The only language which Russia understands is the language of force. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Madam Benavides Cobos.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Es para mí un honor representar a mi país, México, en esta Asamblea Parlamentaria del Consejo de Europa. Felicito al señor Christopher Chop por la presentación de este informe titulado La represión transnacional como una amenaza creciente para el Estado de Derecho y los derechos humanos. Coincidimos con él en que el respeto de los derechos humanos, la defensa de la democracia y el Estado de Derecho deben ser una prioridad permanente para todos. Como bien sabemos, el principio universal de derechos humanos es que todas las personas cuenten con ellos de manera inherente, sin distinción alguna, por lo que están interrelacionados, son interdependientes e indivisibles. Para que sean respetados, deben estar en nuestras constituciones, en nuestras leyes, en el derecho internacional, en los principios generales y otras fuentes del derecho. A partir de la reforma del 2011, mi país modificó el respeto a los derechos humanos, porque ahora no solamente se tienen que garantizar los que están contemplados en la Carta Magna, sino también en todos nuestros tratados internacionales. Es decir, que ante una diferencia entre nuestras leyes federales, se estará en lo dispuesto por el Tratado Internacional. Esto se conoce como control de convencionalidad. Coincidimos con lo propuesto en el informe de que los Estados miembros y observadores deben establecer una definición oficial de represión transnacional para ser utilizada en todas las agencias gubernamentales y revisar las prácticas del intercambio de contrainteligencia y aplicación de la ley para garantizar el pleno respeto de los derechos humanos de todas y de todos en nuestro territorio. Tenemos que identificar esta represión transnacional, pero sobre todo sancionarla y evitarla. En México, la extradición es un mecanismo de cooperación internacional. Su procedimiento se rige por los tratados internacionales y por la Ley de Extradición Internacional y principio de reciprocidad. Son dos figuras las que lo componen, el Estado requerido y el Estado requirente. Y el proceso se lleva ante un juez federal penal que debe garantizar los derechos humanos y, por supuesto, respetar el Estado de Derecho. Sin lugar a dudas, la libertad de expresión, de asociación, incluso movimientos disidentes, son elementos de cualquier democracia moderna. En el Senado mexicano, al que pertenezco, se han expresado las preocupaciones de las y los legisladores respecto a las trágicas consecuencias de la guerra que se vive en este continente. Las intervenciones del representante de México en la ONU han mostrado a nuestra nación como promotora de la paz y el diálogo. Estamos convencidos que es el diálogo la única vía posible para dirimir nuestras diferencias. Gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias. That concludes the list of speakers. I now call on Sir Christopher as rapporteur to reply, and you have 3 minutes.
Can I thank everybody for participating in what I think has been an excellent debate. A number of issues have arisen, one being the definition of transnational repression. But all I can say is that the report calls for more work to be done on this. But I think for most people, when they are confronted with it, they know that it is transnational repression. So I wouldn't be too hung up on the definitions. I'm grateful to my two colleagues from the UK Parliament who are members of the Socialist group. They referred to the Assange case. I share their concerns about the Assange case, particularly the length of time it's taking to resolve. But at least Assange is going to be able to go through, and is going through, the courts of law in the United Kingdom, and potentially and ultimately he could actually come before the European Court of Human Rights. That is a right which is being denied to the victims of transnational repression to whom we're referring in this report. But can I just say that I think Mr. Corbyn needs to be congratulated on having celebrated 40 years this month of continuous service in the United Kingdom Parliament. Well done, Jeremy. As far as the Turkish contribution is concerned, it is, of course, of great concern to me that the only Turkish speaker basically says, well, because the president's been re-elected, then it's all hunky-dory, we mustn't criticise Turkey. We're criticising Turkey in this report because, as I said at the beginning, Turkey is the only one of the 5 countries where transnational repression is identified most frequently. It's the only one of those 5 countries which is in the Council of Europe. And therefore, why shouldn't we concentrate on putting our own house in order before telling other people how to do theirs? The issue of China has been raised, but obviously we're concerned in this report, and I refer to China in the full text of the report, but we're concerned about the perpetrators, the countries which are perpetrating this, rather than the victims who are already in Europe and are the subject of reprisals by, for example, the Communist Party in China. So let's concentrate on those countries within the Council of Europe who are complicit in, if not active in, the acts of transnational repression. That's what this is about. And the report and this debate show that there's a heck of a lot more work to be done. We've only just sort of turned the first page, and I hope that the Human Rights and Legal Affairs Committee will get to grips with more of the examples that we have been talking about today. But once again, thank you to everybody for their solidarity, and I hope that notwithstanding the Turkish contribution, that we will be able to have a unanimous support for this report from this Assembly today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does the chairperson of the committee wish to speak? If so, you have 3 minutes.
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je serai bref, juste pour rappeler qu'il y a un mois précisément, le 23 mai, à Larnaca, à Chypre, le comité des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme a apporté son soutien unanime au rapport de notre collègue Christopher Chope sur la répression transnationale. Lors de notre réunion de commission qui s'est tenue il y a 2 jours, elle a rejeté à une très large majorité 2 amendements déposés qui portaient sur la Turquie. Par ailleurs, elle a accepté à l'unanimité un amendement portant sur la répression numérique transnationale qui avait pour but de rappeler le caractère privé de la communication. Donc cela a été rappelé par le rapporteur. Son rapport est un premier texte du Conseil de l'Europe qui traite enfin de manière détaillée de cette question-là. Il n'entend pas naturellement répondre à toutes les questions et c'est vrai que moi je suis très partisan de nous préoccuper dans cette logique-là aussi des interventions des États extra-européens à l'intérieur de notre territoire parce que c'est un phénomène qui est croissant et surtout qui risque de devenir plus important. Pour autant, même si la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme autorise un certain nombre de recours juridiques aujourd'hui face à tout cela, il nous a semblé important de lancer un appel au comité des ministres afin qu'il prenne sur lui aussi d'arriver à ce qui a été évoqué par plusieurs des orateurs, c'est-à-dire à une définition juridique précise de ce que nous appelons la répression transnationale. En tous les cas, en avoir une définition au sein même du Conseil de l'Europe. Et par ailleurs, il faudra aussi que le comité des ministres, et nous y tenons beaucoup, à suivre le suivi des recommandations qui sont faites ici, parce que nous le voyons avec, et nous aurons l'occasion de l'aborder dans d'autres rapports, la répression contre les militants anti-guerre en Fédération de Russie et autres montrent que les poursuites qui risquent d'être engagées auprès des personnes qui, pour se protéger, se sont exilées sur le territoire actuel du Conseil de l'Europe, va poser certainement des problèmes nouveaux et quantitativement élevés dans les semaines et dans les mois qui viennent. Je terminerai donc en félicitant le rapporteur pour le sérieux de son travail, l'équilibre qu'il a essayé de maintenir et je veux aussi naturellement remercier le secrétariat qui, comme toujours, a eu un apport important dans ce travail et je vous rends la parole. Merci.
Thank you very much. The debate is now closed. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution, which is document 15787, to which 3 amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation, which is document 15787, to which no amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 1 to the draft resolution, which was unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so?
Oui, tout à fait, c'est l'amendement numéro 1.
Okay. Does anyone object? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. No? Okay. There is no objection to this, so the amendment will stand. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 2 and 3 to the draft resolution, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as rejected. Is that so? Merci. As nobody objects, amendments 2 and 3 to the draft resolution are rejected. Sorry, was there any objection to that proposal? No? Okay, thank you very much. So the amendments 2 and 3 to the draft resolution are rejected. So, excuse me while I turn to the right page. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15787 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the draft resolution is adopted. We will now consider the draft recommendations contained in document 15787, to which no amendments have been tabled. So we will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation. A 2/3 majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be adopted. And the result has been adopted. So thank you all very much. And please. Do we have the...
Dear colleagues, dear members of the Assembly, the next item of business is the debate on the report titled Closing the Digital Divide, Promoting Equal Access to Digital Technologies, the document 55776, presented by Ms. Estrela on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. In order to finish by 12:55, I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 12:45 to allow time for the reply and the vote. I call Ms. Estrela, rapporteur. You have 7 minutes to present the report, and then we will have further 3 minutes to reply to the debate at the end. Thank you, Ms. Estrela.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, chers collègues. Pour ce dernier débat de la semaine, permettez-moi de commencer par une petite histoire. Imaginons, en chemin de Lisbonne vers Strasbourg cette semaine, j'ai acheté un billet de métro avec mon smartphone pour me rendre à l'aéroport, pris l'avion avec un billet acheté sur Internet et une carte d'embarquement téléchargée à l'avance. Présenté ma carte d'identité nationale à l'embarquement, renouvelée grâce à un rendez-vous pris en ligne. Traiter des messages électroniques en attendant l'avion grâce à une connexion Wi-Fi. Vérifier mes comptes bancaires en m'y connectant en ligne. Échanger des messages avec des membres de ma famille sur ma messagerie téléphonique. C'est une histoire imaginaire, mais réfléchissons. Combien d'actions que nous accomplissons tous les jours dépendent aujourd'hui des technologies numériques? Et combien nous coûte plus cher, nettement plus cher, si nous n'avons pas l'accès? Les technologies numériques sont devenues indispensables pour nos échanges privés, pour nos achats, nos activités professionnelles, nos transactions bancaires et nos démarches administratives qui nous permettent d'accéder à nos droits. Or, et c'est peut-être une évidence, mais c'est important d'en prendre conscience, faire des démarches, exercer ses droits en ligne nécessite d'avoir du matériel qui coûte souvent cher. Une connexion, un appareil, une capacité de stockage, un système d'exploitation et un abonnement payant approprié. Faire des démarches en ligne nécessite aussi des compétences, des connaissances. Ne pas savoir se servir des outils numériques et être en situation d'électronisme est aujourd'hui un obstacle majeur dans la vie de tous les jours. Chers collègues, en septembre dernier, notre commission a examiné, lors d'une audition avec un représentant de la défenseure des droits française, l'impact de la dématérialisation des services publics sur l'égalité d'accès aux droits. Nous avons pris conscience que ce sont les personnes qui ont le plus grand besoin des services publics qui sont les plus touchées par la fracture numérique. Les personnes pauvres ou marginalisées, les personnes en situation de handicap, les personnes âgées ou jeunes, les personnes en détention et les étrangers. Chers collègues, il y aura beaucoup à dire sur les différentes circonstances dans lesquelles la fracture numérique pénalise les personnes touchées. Je compte sur vous pour évoquer ces situations dans vos interventions, car le sujet est vaste et mon temps est compté. Pour lutter contre la fracture numérique, que doivent faire les États? Dans le projet de résolution, nous demandons aux États d'adopter une approche globale. Ils doivent faire de cette lutte une priorité et rendre les technologies utiles numériques inclusives, équitables, accessibles, abordables et sûres pour toutes et tous. Ils doivent soumettre ces politiques à un examen régulier par les parlements nationaux et soutenir les initiatives positives dans ce domaine, notamment au niveau local. Deuxièmement, il faut garantir l'accès de toutes et de tous à une connexion Internet rapide, fiable et abordable. Nous avons auditionné à ce sujet une représentante de l'OCDE et conclu qu'il serait impossible d'identifier un modèle unique qui serait applicable dans tous nos États membres. Le projet de résolution identifie toutefois des principes qui doivent être respectés par tous les États et qui avaient déjà été énoncés par l'Assemblée dans sa résolution 2256 de 2019, intitulée « Gouvernance d'Internet et droits humains ». En troisième lieu, il faut lutter contre l'électronisme en assurant l'accès à des formations pour toutes les personnes qui en ont besoin. Il faut aussi favoriser l'accès de toutes et de tous à l'éducation et aux carrières dans les domaines des sciences, des technologies, de l'ingénierie et des mathématiques, en ligne avec les recommandations de notre résolution 2343 de 2020, intitulée « Prévenir les discriminations résultant de l'utilisation de l'intelligence artificielle ». Enfin, l'égalité d'accès aux services publics est déterminante pour l'exercice d'un grand nombre de nos droits fondamentaux. La Commission a donc formulé une série de recommandations visant à garantir cette égalité d'accès. Nous devons passer d'une logique du 100% numérique à une logique du 100% accessible. Il faut aussi prendre en compte, dès la conception d'un service en ligne, les besoins de toutes les usagères et tous les usagers potentiels. Garantir l'accès à une aide efficace pour réaliser les démarches administratives et mettre en place des points d'accès à Internet gratuits et accessibles. Enfin, ces questions doivent être prises en compte dans les politiques d'aide au développement. Chers collègues, la lutte contre fracture numérique est un sujet vaste et urgent qui nécessite des mesures d'une grande envergure. Il est largement temps que les États renforcent leurs efforts pour éliminer la fracture numérique. Ce projet de résolution rappelle aux États les principes qui doivent guider ces efforts et j'espère qu'il leur donnera aussi les pistes d'action concrètes et utiles pour y parvenir. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Estrella. And in the debate, I call first Ms. Gazarian on behalf of ALDE Group.
Madam Rapporteur, first of all, I would like to congratulate you on this report. What we are facing now is a widespread introduction of technologies, with basic digital tools becoming increasingly essential for fulfilling our fundamental needs. However, this growing reliance on digital technologies has also led to the emergence of inequalities in various domains. The impact of these disparities was felt accurately during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as in war zones and areas affected by the humanitarian crisis. For example, during the pandemic, students require technologies, devices to exercise their fundamental right to education. This highlighted the existence of a digital divide with unequal access to digital technologies. In rural areas, this divide was even more pronounced, as certain states lacked the necessary devices and internet connectivity. Despite the government's effort to ensure equal access, these attempts were not uniformly successful around all the states. The digitalization of public services is another key priority for many member states. However, as outlined in the report, people, particularly those living in rural areas, face challenges in conducting administrative procedures online. Therefore, it is crucial that we transition from merely striving for 100% digital public services to guaranteeing 100% accessibility of these services, as it was pointed in the report. Positive examples were introduced in the report, such as in the Netherlands, when providing access to devices in public libraries helped people and this example demonstrated potential solution. In war zones, the digital divide is further deepened for children who have limited access to devices and to the internet, such as those taking refuge in bomb shelters. Our Ukrainian colleagues told us and described the dire situation where access to these devices is non-existent. Only through the assistance of international donors can we provide not only digital devices, but also necessary training for their usage. A similar scenario unfolds in Nagorno-Karabakh, where the region's total blockade and lack of electricity exacerbate the digital divide. In conclusion, I would like to mention that it is evident that the increased reliance on digital technologies has widened the inequality present in our society. Whether it is a lack of devices and internet access for elderly in the rural areas, the unequal distribution of education resources during a pandemic and war times, or challenges faced by the individuals in humanitarian crises, addressing these disparities requires efforts, our united efforts, and innovative solutions. It is essential for governments to place a high priority on implementing these strategies that aim to bridge the gap between those who have access to digital resources and those who do not have. Thank you.
Now I call Mr. Goncharenko to speak on behalf of European Conservatives and Democratic Alliance Group.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I am so happy to speak now about so important topic, digital divide. Special thanks comes to Rapporteur, because that is about future. Because digital divide, it creates the huge problems for future of our children, of our teenagers, and we need to deal with it now in order to prevent awful consequences for our society. Usually, I am speaking here about what should be done by us, by somebody else in future. But now I want to share with you unique experience which we already did, me and my team. I am speaking about network of educational cultural centers in Ukraine, which are called Goncharenko centers. That is the biggest in Ukraine educational cultural network, the biggest one, with no penny from budget, just with the private sponsors and those who are really worried about what's going on. One of them is Lord Michael Ashcroft. Special thanks comes to him. And what we do, we are learning our children, teenagers, and not only. Our youngest student is 4 years old. Our oldest student is 84 years old. But we learn them English language, French language, German language, Polish. We learn them cybersecurity, digital technologies, exactly about digital divide. Now we have a special program together with the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of 8 universities of Ivy League. Now we have a special programs with other international organizations in order to give access to education, to culture, and to humanitarian aid to all those who are in need. especially in Ukraine. Just imagine 2 years of COVID pandemic, then 16 months of war, of invasion to our country. We became a shelter for education for thousands of Ukrainians. Just last year, more than 100,000 people came through our centers. And our accent is on small towns, Zhmerinka, Balta, Podolsk, Mirgorod. Maybe you've never heard these names, but Ukrainian children and adults are living there. And now they're receiving education and culture from our centers. So I address to all of you, let us work together. If anybody of you is interested in joining in these efforts, in doing something together, we will be happy to do this with you, with your universities, with your friends. Also, if anybody of you is interested in this unique experience of what we are doing in other countries of the world, please join us. That is so important, to educate, to show, to work on social media. By the way, probably I will be the first delegate of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe with 1 million followers in YouTube just in several days. We need to address people there in social media too, for them to know what to do. So I address to you, let's work together, let's do our job. The resolution is good, but let us do something concrete in order to help our children and teenagers. Thank you.
And now I would like to call Mr. Mathieu on behalf of Left Group.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, chers collègues, tout d'abord au nom de mon groupe, je tiens à saluer la qualité de ce rapport et de ces propositions que nous soutenons bien évidemment. La situation de la fracture numérique est aujourd'hui une problématique absolument majeure à l'heure de la numérisation de l'ensemble des démarches, notamment les démarches administratives et d'accès aux droits. Ainsi, nous devons réaffirmer une chose centrale dont découlent ensuite les propositions de ce rapport et les propositions que je porte dans cette intervention au nom de mon groupe. L'accès à Internet et aux nouvelles technologies est devenu un bien essentiel à la vie et singulièrement à la vie digne. Si durant ces dernières décennies, l'accès à Internet n'était qu'une solution de divertissement ou un moyen annexe de communication et de vie, ce n'est plus le cas. On est face à un changement anthropologique majeur. Désormais, on peut par exemple se lier à des personnes sans ne les avoir jamais rencontrées physiquement, discuter avec elles de façon quotidienne d'un bout à l'autre du monde. Désormais, les institutions, administrations, entreprises ont décidé de dématérialiser un grand nombre de procédures, de moyens de contact, de règlement de conflits même et d'accès aux droits. Il est donc fondamental que l'ensemble de la population puisse accéder à Internet et donc puisse avoir accès aux technologies qui le permettent. Pour une partie de la population, il conviendra notamment de mettre en place des processus de formation et d'aide à l'accès aux droits numériques. Comme le pointe ce rapport, mais aussi la défenseure des droits en France, la dématérialisation grandissante des services publics est une problématique très élevée pour l'accès aux droits. Pour exemple, le rapport de la défenseure des droits en France est sans appel. Je cite, « Début 2022, près de 40% des démarches administratives en ligne sont accessibles aux personnes en situation de handicap. Cette augmentation peut être saluée comme une avancée, mais ne saurait suffire à garantir l'accès universel aux démarches administratives dès lors que plus de 60% d'entre elles demeurent encore hors de portée des personnes en situation de handicap. Il en va de même de la situation des personnes détenues, qui n'a quasiment pas évolué alors qu'elles sont confrontées à la nécessité de réaliser des démarches administratives pour faire valoir leurs droits. Un constat analogue prévaut pour d'autres catégories de personnes, comme les personnes en situation de pauvreté, les personnes âgées, les majeurs protégés. Ainsi, pour la mise en œuvre de la recommandation 12.1 de ce rapport, j'insiste, il convient de mettre un coup d'arrêt aux politiques budgétaires d'austérité qui entraînent la fermeture de nombreux services publics ou la réduction du nombre d'agents disponibles pour recevoir du public. Il conviendra aussi de s'assurer que l'ensemble des demandes d'accès aux droits et autres procédures soient accessibles et réalisables dans des guichets physiques pour l'ensemble des personnes qui n'ont pas accès à Internet ou tout simplement ne souhaitent pas recourir à Internet pour ces démarches. En plus du redéploiement des services publics dans l'ensemble des territoires, il convient également de garantir le droit à un accès minimal gratuit à Internet pour toutes et tous et interdire les coupures d'accès à Internet. Internet est devenu un réseau essentiel à la vie. Nous devons déployer un service public de proximité pour les personnes d'électronisme en coordonnant et renforçant les moyens des acteurs de la médiation numérique. En effet, une très grande partie de la population est en situation d'électronisme. En France, c'est par exemple le cas de 20% de la population, ce qui est énorme. Merci encore donc à la rapporteure pour la qualité de ce rapport et de ses propositions, et mon groupe votera favorablement pour ce rapport. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew. And now I'm calling Mr. Shanach on behalf of Socialist Group.
Danke sehr, Frau Präsidentin. Im Namen der Sozialdemokratischen und Grünen Gruppe möchte ich der Berichterstatterin ein ganz großes Kompliment zu diesem Bericht machen, denn er legt den Finger auf eine ganz aktuell und ganz wichtige Frage. Die digitale Kluft zwischen Stadt und Land, zwischen älterer Generation und jüngerer Generation, zwischen Firmen und privaten Haushalten, unterschiedlicher Bildungsgraden und Menschen mit besonderen Bedürfnissen zu anderen wächst und wächst und wächst, und es entstehen Benachteiligungen. Wo es weniger wächst, das ist mir aufgefallen, dass Menschen, die Flüchtlinge sind oder aus der Migration kommen, dass die enorm vertraut sind mit der digitalen Welt und dass das Mobilphone direkt ein Markenzeichen neuer Flüchtlingsbewegungen geworden ist. Aber wir müssen trotzdem aufpassen, dass es zu keinen sozialen Benachteiligungen kommt und dass die Versorgung mit Netzen eine Form der Daseinsvorsorge ist. Das heißt, der Staat, die Gemeinden, die Städte müssen sich hier viel stärker engagieren. Es muss einen freien Zugang geben, auch von der Technik her, aber auch von den Trägern, also Open Sources. Und es muss garantiert werden, dass dieser Zugang gleichberechtigt ist, dass er auch genderneutral ist und dass hier besonders auch bedacht wird, dass Benachteiligte hier stärker betroffen sind. Es bedarf ganz einer Reihe von politischen Maßnahmen gegen diese Kluft, die hier wächst. Und bei der Digitalisierung des öffentlichen Dienstes, hier ist es noch einmal mehr geboten zu achten, dass der gleichberechtigte Zugang gegeben ist und dass niemand einen Nachteil hat, weil er zum Beispiel ein älterer Mensch ist oder sich mit dieser Technik nicht auskennt, dass ihm das Rechte nimmt. Ganz besonders wichtig halte ich auch den Datenschutz, denn das Gold von heute sind die Daten, die überall abgegraben werden. Frau Vorsitzende, ich erlaube mir noch einmal auf Julian Assange zurückzukommen und auf die Debatte von vorhin. Vor ungefähr 3 Jahren habe ich in diesem Plenum einen Antrag gestellt, der einstimmig angenommen ist auf die sofortige Freilassung von Julian Assange. Und jetzt ist die Situation dermaßen dramatisch, dass wir uns daran erinnern sollten, dass Julian Assange, der weniger ein Whistleblower ist als ein investigativer Journalist, dass er freikommt und dass das Vereinigte Königreich ihn nicht für 140 Jahre Haftstrafe ausliefert. Das wäre eine unglaubliche menschenrechtliche Schmach.
Thank you, Mr. Shanach. And now I call Ms. Sachiva to take the floor.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Assembly, I would like first of all to congratulate our rapporteur, Mrs. Strela, for this very timely report, not just her, but also the entire Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination as the initiator of this report. It is fairly pointed out at the beginning of the draft resolution that this issue was raised back in 2001 by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is under the scrutiny of the Assembly. I dare believe that today's report is just the beginning of the debate. Hence, I would like to touch upon several items which, in my view, have to be addressed not just in a resolution, but in a recommendation of the Assembly. One such is the link between the digital divide and the labor market. A number of renowned studies forecast that a whole 90% of the jobs in the near future will require the use of digital technologies. We should therefore address the problem of automatization of low-skilled jobs on one hand and the demand for highly skilled workers needed for the jobs of the future. The ever-growing divide between generations when it comes to digital technologies may eventually lead to social exclusion due to lack of skills, economic exclusion, and consequently to social stresses. In order to curtail this divide, it is necessary to invest and promote targeted actions by public institutions, businesses, social partners, NGOs, and education system. Education is of vital significance so as not to leave anyone behind and to prevent marginalization and radicalization. Finally, I would like to touch upon inequality in education, labor status inequality, and regional inequality in relation to digital skills. The necessary resources to tackle these inequalities have to be urgently allocated because there is a direct link between digital skills, middle class, and the wealth of states. We know that digitalization will impact the middle class in the strongest possible means, which will directly affect Europe's prosperity and competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sachiva. Now we come to the speakers list, and I call Mr. Evstatiu to take the floor.
I don't know. Thank you, Ms. Chair. First of all, I would like to endorse all that my friend Stefan Schener has said about the persecution of Julian Assange, which is a disgrace for our democracy. And secondly, I would like to thank dear Edith for your comprehensive report and extraordinary work on this important issue. Digital technology has become indispensable and necessary to our lives. But as a matter of principle, every human being has a right to equal access and opportunity to use digital technologies. Bridging the digital divide is a major challenge, and to effectively address it, we need to adopt common national policies supported by sufficient funding, competent public services, and the promotion of creative private initiatives. As the harsh realities of the COVID-19 pandemic have taught us, the most important step is making sure that everyone has access to the technological infrastructure and the tools needed to participate in the digitalized world we live in. Raising awareness and developing education and training programs are also vital, especially when designed for the very young and very senior generations. Fulfilling the needs of the most disadvantaged groups of society should be at the top of our agendas. Whether held back from their social status, their financial situation, even from serious illness or a disability, those living on the margins of society, especially children, don't deserve to be exposed to more disparity and may amplify existing inequalities and promote dissociation and discrimination. As rapporteur of the role of education in the digital era and the impact of COVID-19 on education and culture, one of my key observations were the need to put into place specific guidelines and a more comprehensive action plan to support children with disabilities who are particularly vulnerable and at the high-end risk of increased social isolation in time of crisis. This is precisely the reason I have submitted oral amendments to this draft resolution pertaining to the obligation by states to provide the tools and mechanisms necessary to remove all obstacles, so as to ensure that children with disabilities enjoy equal and unhindered access to online education. Thank you, my dear colleague, for agreeing to include this text to the resolution, which I fully endorse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evstatiu. And now I call Ms. Yasko to take the floor.
Dear colleagues, I want to ask you, when you see some information in the internet or in a social media, do you trust it? How often do you question this information that you got? Have you ever wondered why you just talk about something with your friends or your colleagues and then in your Instagram or Google or Facebook you suddenly saw it? Don't you find it's very, very worrying? When we talk about the digital divide, I'm very worried about disinformation and about how much we are all affected by those who actually abuse our right to get information and to check it with a critical thinking, but someone is imposing this information on us. And often this is a manipulation. And I've been calling for different policies that we really need in the member states that will cover different countries on combating disinformation and also manipulation. And in fact, some technologies and some solutions exist that can provide us information whether this is truth or it's a manipulation or there is a distortion of the facts. And I'm speaking now as a human being and of course also as Ukrainian. And I know how many of you, our foreign friends, are also struggling with this information and how often we Ukrainians get the questions from you whether this picture is true or it's fake. And then we suddenly see that Russia was using the fake news and fake photos. But we need to learn how to check this. And when we talk about this report, I think the question of the digital divide should be coming with the question of trusting this information that we receive. And I'm very worried when we talk about our children and about those who actually are lacking critical thinking. They cannot check this information. So what do we do? How do we know how they learn what's happening in the world? And I'm sure that in a schooling system, in education, that should be one of the targets. And on the policy level, that also should be one of the focuses of how do we make sure that we actually live in the world with truth, not fakes. And with all the political and other consequences of the Russian aggression, we should be talking about the digital consequences too. Because now it's very hard with our social media and with other digital technologies that we are using to be sure that no one manipulates us. But as long as we remember that we have to check it and that we have to educate the critical thinking, then we will have some safe tools to protect our information. Because without it, all world of information and the digital divide will be incredibly manipulated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yesko. And now I call Mr. Lacroix to take the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Ma collègue Edith Estrela a commencé par une petite histoire. Je vais vous raconter aussi une petite histoire. Mon papa a 86 ans, il est en maison de retraite, il a ses facultés mentales intactes, mais il a des difficultés à se déplacer. C'est une victime de la fracture numérique et c'est un otage des banques. Pourquoi otage des banques? Parce qu'il dispose d'une carte bancaire, il ne peut plus faire de versement ou de virement papier, son agence bancaire a fermé et dès lors c'est avec ses deux enfants, donc mon frère et moi, à qui il confie la carte de banque qu'il peut retirer de l'argent. Trouvons-nous normal qu'une personne âgée perde à ce point une forme de dignité et doive faire un striptease de sa comptabilité, de son argent, devant ses enfants, voire parfois même, dans les cas les plus difficiles, devant des inconnus, qui sont des personnes dites de confiance. Et donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle l'intelligence artificielle, mais également donc, les nouvelles technologies, peuvent être des facteurs de progrès immenses, mais aussi des facteurs de discrimination. J'ai traité ce rapport sur les discriminations, mais également un facteur d'inégalité sociale, d'inégalité économique, d'inégalité culturelle, d'inégalité liée à l'âge. Et dans le rapport d'Edith Estrela, on trouve des propositions pour remédier à ces lacunes, comme une aide à remplir et soumettre des formulaires en ligne, mais aussi bénéficier des conseils d'agents, d'agentes du service public. C'est aussi, dans le rapport d'Edith, une chose excellente que je souligne, c'est garantir la possibilité de corriger les erreurs par des procédures simples et accessibles. Je pense que, comme pour l'argent liquide, qui pour moi est un droit fondamental à garantir, l'accès à l'argent liquide, je pense que l'on doit pouvoir garantir l'accès papier de toutes les formalités exigées par les banques, par les services publics. Et donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle, dans le rapport d'Edith, je souligne aussi sa proposition de garantir l'importance des services publics 100% dématérialisés en une logique de service public 100% accessible, y compris un accès non numérisé. C'est une garantie d'accès qui figure dans le rapport d'édité et je la félicite pour cela. En effet, nous devons tout faire pour réduire la fracture numérique, parce qu'il y a une question de dignité humaine, et nous devons toutes et tous travailler à plus d'humanisation, à véritablement rédiger un plaidoyer pour que le numérique, l'intelligence artificielle soient au service de l'humain, mais de toutes les composantes de ce qui constitue l'être humain, depuis l'enfance jusqu'à la fin de vie. C'est pour moi essentiel. Je vous remercie beaucoup.
The next speaker is Mr. Kamelchuk. You take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dear colleagues, today I want to address a pressing issue that hinders equality in our society, the digital divide. Access to digital technologies is crucial for public services, education, and countless opportunities. However, many individuals are excluded from these benefits, creating barriers to equality and limiting their life chances. Millions of refugees have no equal access to digital technologies and proper equipment. Even in the UA, in the conclusion regarding Ukrainians' application for candidate status, both the decentralization reform and the Ukrainian centers for the provision of administrative services were noted, and application DIA was noted by Ukrainian citizens abroad. And now European countries start to issue these technologies for administrative needs. DIA now is recognized in 58 countries. We must shift our focus from merely achieving digitalization to ensuring accessibility for all. Governments must prioritize maintaining non-digital access to public services, guaranteeing equality and continuity. Adequate support should be provided to individuals, ensuring they receive assistance in carrying out administrative procedures and accessing their rights. The COVID-19 pandemic has widened the digital divide, emphasizing the inequalities we face. With billions of people lacking internet access, we cannot ignore this issue. Combating digital illiteracy is crucial, and initiatives at the local level, like public libraries, play a vital role in providing training and support. The digital divide encompasses various dimensions: gender, generational, social, and disability divides. Bridging these gaps is essential to ensure equal opportunities. Governments must address geographical imbalances and guarantee access to public services through both digital and non-digital means. To overcome the divide, we must prioritize universal internet access. Policies for network deployment and adequate funding are necessary. The digital divide should be integrated into development aid measures, and access to digital training should be seen as an investment in society's future. Let us work together to ensure equal access to digital technologies for all individuals. By closing the digital divide, we can create a fair and inclusive society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Madame Mara. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Vice-présidente, chers collègues. J'aimerais aussi, moi, vous raconter une petite histoire. J'ai pu être pendant longtemps présidente en Suisse de l'association Lire et Écrire qui luttait contre l'illettrisme. Et les témoignages de ces personnes étaient extrêmement touchants puisqu'ils nous disaient qu'apprendre à lire et écrire les libérait, leur donnait la possibilité d'avoir un secret, puisqu'au fond, quand on ne sait pas lire et écrire, on dépose à d'autres, comme l'a d'ailleurs bien expliqué le collègue Lacroix, le pouvoir et notre vie. Et je pense qu'il s'agit ici effectivement pour le numérique du même process, et qu'au fond on parle de liberté. La fracture numérique, ce sont deux choses que montre bien ce rapport. D'une part, c'est l'accès aux infrastructures numériques avec une bonne couverture nationale, mais aussi un accès au numérique par la formation et l'utilisation de ces nouvelles technologies. Et le rôle de l'État en cela est complètement fondamental puisque c'est lui qui doit assurer le service public, qui est seul garant au fond de l'égalité de traitement entre les citoyens. D'une part, dans sa responsabilité de la couverture et des prestations, indépendamment du zone d'habitation du citoyen et indépendamment aussi du niveau socio-économique de la personne pour accéder et se former à ces technologies. Pourtant, il y a comme un paradoxe, je trouve, dans notre discussion, puisqu'au fond, nous sommes plusieurs à vouloir une couverture universelle et gratuite, mais en même temps, nous reconnaissons tous le danger, j'allais dire, sans paraître pour une vieille conservatrice rétrograde, que peuvent avoir ces nouvelles technologies en nous privant du lien humain. Le Covid, en tout cas, je ne sais pas comment ça s'est passé dans vos villes, mais il y a eu pendant le Covid des situations extrêmes où les services sociaux se sont bunkérisés chez elles, où on disait aux bénéficiaires, vous n'avez qu'à écrire par Internet, ce qui est évidemment impossible pour tout un tas de gens, et ce sont les vraies personnes, les vraies associations sur le terrain qui ont tenu le bateau. Donc il y a cette espèce de paradoxe où il faut garder ce matériel et ce lien. Et donc, moi, je pense que cette résolution, et je remercie la rapporteure pour son travail, qui met en évidence quand même tous ces paradoxes, cette résolution doit s'accompagner d'autres résolutions, d'autres rapports de ce Conseil, notamment sur l'intelligence artificielle et sur le danger des réseaux, ce qui a déjà été fait par le passé et ce qui est en train de se faire. Et en cela, on ne peut pas isoler ce rapport qui est très bien en l'accompagnant d'autres résolutions qui sont en cours. Merci.
Now I would like to call Ms. Larissa Belazir. You have the floor.
Dear Madam President, I'm so happy to see you chairing, Ukrainian women chairing, dear colleagues. I would like to commend Rapporteur Edith Estrela for such a comprehensive report promoting equal access to digital technologies and proposing measures to reduce this digital divide. As a head of subcommittee of administrative procedures and administrative services, I fully agree with the statement that when it comes to the digitalization of public services, states must move from the logic of 100% digitalization to 100% accessibility. Today, governments mainly focus on the most popular current policy direction, digitalization. That is a key trend in Ukraine now, and the number of users of application of DIA is growing. It's like 18 million people in it, and in times of war, it became very useful because people lost their documents in foreign homes, and of course, the documents are electronically in DIA application, and there are lots of services, COVID certificate in it, helpful register the damaged homes, services for internally displaced persons. This is also very good for both, for people and system, but the state cannot function only in smartphones. Meanwhile, the most massive administrative services such as social support, passport services, registration of real estate, marriages, deaths, vehicles, they very important, and there is very important the interaction between person and citizens in the sense of providing administrative services. In Ukraine, by the end of this year, instead of war, we will have this centers in each community out of 1,500. I would like to concentrate also on one of human dimensions of the digital divide mentioned in the report, the social divide. The vulnerable group are Ukrainian children now, and a large part of education infrastructure was destroyed by Russian shelling, and as of June 2023, the losses in education is $10 billion. During the year of full-scale war, Russians destroyed or damaged 1,700 schools, 1,100 kindergartens, 71 universities. These are impressive numbers. 1 million pupils changed the form of education from full-time to distance because of war. According to teaches about 70% of students do not have constant access to the educational process during the war. And only 40% of parents indicated that children were constantly learning. So I support our colleagues from ALDE, the colleague from ALDE that told that we need gadgets, we need help in bomb shelters, because children can go even in safe places, but there is no bomb shelters in it. So I want to say that the educational process depends on shelling and bomb shelters availability in Ukraine, and Ukraine needs support also in this from our international partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blazir. And now the next speaker is Ms. Höchst. You have the floor.
Frau Präsidentin, werte Kollegen! 63% der Weltbevölkerung haben Zugang zum Internet, beinahe 40% nicht. Hier verläuft also der große Graben. Die EU hat bereits bekundet, 200 Milliarden Euro einsetzen zu wollen, um den beschworenen Graben zu überwinden. Das betrifft auch deutsche Steuergelder. Deswegen gestatten Sie bitte, dass ich der Resolution nicht zustimme, ohne wenigstens wichtige Fragen zu stellen. Warum gibt es neben dem Lebensentwurf, der immer mehr Digitalität erfordert, keine anerkannten Alternativen? Der immer digitalere Lebensentwurf wird in der angestrebten globalisierten Welt absolut gesetzt, und alle Hebel müssen national und international in Bewegung gesetzt werden, um dieses Ziel zu erreichen. Das ist doch eher totalitär. Wurden eigentlich Bürger weltweit gefragt, ob sie immer digitaler leben wollen? Ist die große Transformation von Welt und Gesellschaft etwas, was als Wunsch oder Ziel genuin aus der Mitte der Menschen kommt, oder ist das vielleicht ein Entwurf, der allen Menschen aller Völker von einigen wenigen Vordenkern übergeholfen werden soll? Bürokratie und Kommerz zwingen Menschen immer häufiger aus der analogen Welt ins Digitale. Digitalität ist quasi ein Angebot, was man gar nicht ablehnen kann. Wie praktisch, dass mit der angestrebten weltweiten Digitalität giganteske Summen verdient werden. Die von der EU ausgelobten 200 Milliarden Euro sind diesbezüglich ein Tropfen auf den heißen Stein. Mehr Digitalität bedeutet auch immer weniger analogen, emotionalen und sozialen Kontakt mit anderen Menschen mit unbekannten Folgen. Wir müssen auch über die Gefahr der totalen Kontrolle über die Menschen sprechen, die eine grassierende Digitalisierung in sich birgt. In einer durchdigitalisierten Welt werden die vielen Milliarden Menschen künftig beherrschbar für Regierungen, für die WHO und für Interessensgeber. Auch wenn ich dafür bin, dass jeder Mensch nach Möglichkeit Zugang zu den Segnungen des Fortschritts und Internets haben soll und deswegen zustimmen werde, so vermisse ich doch die kritische Wachsamkeit, mit der wir als Menschenrechtsrat für uns in Anspruch nehmen müssten, über die Menschenrechte und letztlich die Menschenrechte zu überwachen und zu bewachen und vor der Digitalisierung zu schützen. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. And now I call Madame Clapot, but I don't see her in... sorry. You have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Madame la rapporteure, chers collègues. Xenia a 20 ans, elle a besoin d'une aide au logement pour ses études, elle n'a pas les moyens de s'acheter un ordinateur, or la démarche est numérique. Mohamed et Marie ont 30 ans, ils doivent inscrire leur premier enfant à l'école maternelle la rentrée prochaine, or la démarche est numérique. Marinette a 80 ans, elle habite en milieu rural, ses petits-enfants viennent moins la voir depuis le Covid-19, ils veulent lui envoyer des photos de leurs vacances en mode digital, bien sûr. Lui, ça a 40 ans et doit déclarer ses revenus pour payer ses impôts en temps et en heure, en ligne évidemment. Maxime cumule plusieurs handicaps. L'accès aux sites de services publics et d'achat en ligne est très compliqué pour lui. Riyad doit effectuer sa demande de titre de séjour, sinon il risque l'expulsion de son pays de résidence. Francesca a 64 ans, elle doit immatriculer sa nouvelle voiture sous peine de perdre son travail et on lui dit « connectez-vous au site ». Quel que soit leur âge, nos concitoyens de toute l'Europe ont besoin du numérique pour effectuer leurs démarches et cet accès aux services numérisés ne peut pas être que leur affaire privée. C'est bien en priorité à l'État, mais aussi aux collectivités territoriales et au final à un ensemble de politiques publiques que nous devons collectivement demander une politique et des mesures. Les infrastructures et les réseaux doivent être développés, la formation au numérique à tout âge doit être une priorité, les services publics doivent viser avant tout l'accessibilité. Si on n'a pas le matériel adéquat, on doit pouvoir se rendre dans un lieu qui en dispose et qui offre aussi un service via des vrais humains et qui met en garde contre le vol de données et la désinformation. Mais aussi, ce sujet est un sujet de protection de l'environnement. Ne subissons plus le renouvellement trop rapide des appareils, outils et technologies. Promouvons la réutilisation et le reconditionnement des terminaux, à condition bien sûr qu'ils soient dignes de confiance et avec un prix abordable. La filière du reconditionnement peut et doit être soutenue par l'État en termes de régulation, de collecte, de soutien à la formation, de soutien aux acteurs, de labellisation pour donner confiance. J'en profite d'ailleurs pour vous inviter à vider vos cartons et vos tiroirs et à contribuer à cette collecte en remettant vos appareils usagés. C'est ainsi que Xenia, Mohamed, Marie, Marinette, Luis, Maxime, Riyad pourront accéder aux mêmes services, quel que soit leur lieu de résidence, leur âge, leur handicap et leur genre. Alors, Madame la rapporteure, chère Edith, bravo pour ce travail et allons plus loin ensemble.
The next speaker is Ms. Karimzada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to the Madame Rapporteur. We know that the digital divide has a negative impact on the economy. When citizens do not have digital skills and knowledge of advanced technologies, they are unable to progress in their career and contribute to the country's economy. Our concerns about the digital divide have been especially critical during the COVID-19 pandemic, when internet and digital devices have played an important role in allowing people to access services. Once again, we realized that we need to solve this problem so that people can have access to vital services such as cash transfers, medical information, educational content, or employment opportunities, and so on. To address these gaps, governments and the private sector urgently need to include the issue of digital divide in their agendas. States should pay attention to making digital technologies and services inclusive, fair, accessible, affordable, and safe for everyone in order to ensure equal access to the digital world. To eliminate the digital divide, programs should be developed. In Azerbaijan, digitization is an integral part of a state policy. Digital technology and innovative solutions are widely used in the provision of government services. Considering the importance of digitalization in the development of the country, this area is taken as a priority in all strategies for the future. The Azerbaijani government is working on applying new modern technologies, smart technologies and projects for the restoration of liberated areas. Applying best international experience, concepts such as smart city and smart village are being implemented in territories that liberated from Armenian occupation. This in turn allows citizens to use services, especially government services, in a better way. Residents living in those cities can also communicate directly with the city administration using different digital tools, internet, mobile applications, and many other online portals. For this reason, various measures are taken by the state to increase the potential of human capital with digital skills. The government has allocated financial resources for the staff training in various digital specialties in private courses. Also, digital economy, data analytics, e-commerce, and similar new specialties are being taught at universities. One of the specialties in the field of ICT that has recently seen a greater demand in cybersecurity. Currently, a lot of work is done in this direction in Azerbaijan. It means that Azerbaijan has high development potential in this field. By the way, dear colleagues, the 74th International Astronautical Congress to be held in Baku, capital of Azerbaijan, is a milestone initiative at the global level. Thank you for your attention.
The next speaker is Ms. Petra Bayer. Please, you have the floor.
Ja, vielen lieben Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Der Zugang zum Internet, zum globalen Netz ist mittlerweile so essentiell, dass manche sogar schon von einem Menschenrecht auf Internet sprechen. Ich nehme auch zur Kenntnis, dass andere die Weltverschwörung dahinter wittern, wo die WTO oder die WHO, Entschuldigung, irgendwelche Fäden ziehen und Alternativen zu suchen sind. Vielleicht probieren Sie es einmal mit Brieftauben, könnte durchaus eine Alternative sein, die zu Ihrer Kultur passen könnte. Aber ich möchte jetzt Sarkasmus auf Ediths Bericht eingehen, die ja sehr viele Themen anspricht, und ich mag 3 davon aufgreifen. Und das erste ist das, was Grevio uns empfiehlt, weil Grevio vollkommen zu Recht sagt, dass mit einem besseren, mit mehr Zugang zum Internet natürlich auch die Online-Gewalt und da vor allem die Online-Gewalt gegen Frauen zunimmt. Und es ist sehr, sehr wichtig, häusliche Gewalt oder familiäre Gewalt nicht nur als physikalische, also als körperliche Gewalt zu begreifen, sondern durchaus auch zur Kenntnis zu nehmen, dass wir Maßnahmen brauchen, um digitale Gewalt in den Griff zu kriegen. Und ich halte persönlich nichts davon, dass wir die Internetprovider, die Social-Media-Anbieter dazu aufrufen, sich selbst zu beschränken. Ich glaube, wir brauchen einfach sehr klare Regelungen, die nicht nur bei Rassismus oder bei Antisemitismus oder bei anderen Formen von Hass, sondern durchaus auch bei verbaler und psychischer Gewalt gegen Frauen, die im Internet daherkommen, ansetzen. Andererseits ist es aber auch sehr notwendig, dass Frauen, die von Gewalt betroffen sind, Zugang zu diesen Ressourcen haben, weil es gibt sehr viele Möglichkeiten, über die digitale Welt einerseits Hilfe zu rufen, aber andererseits auch zu dokumentieren, was mir widerfahren ist an Gewalt, damit ich dann auch später bei einem Gerichtsverfahren wirklich Beweise habe. Den zweiten Bereich, den ich gerne ansprechen möchte, und mein Kollege Stefan Schenach ist schon darauf eingegangen, und darum mache ich es kurz. Es ist auch wirklich wichtig, nicht digitale Alternativen zu haben, weil nicht jeder wird jederzeit die Fähigkeiten und die Möglichkeit haben, online, sei es jetzt irgendwelche sozialen Förderungen beantragen zu können, sei es Zugang zum Wahlrecht zu haben, sei es Zugang zu lebensnotwendigen Informationen zu haben. Also Daseinsvorsorge muss immer auch nicht digital passieren können, damit wir niemanden ausschließen aufgrund von Alter, Sprache, Behinderung oder was auch immer. Und der dritte Bereich, den ich ansprechen möchte, ist das, was Edith zu Recht auch sagt, dass 3,6 Milliarden Menschen auf dieser Welt keinen Zugang zu Online-Services haben, zu Internet haben, und es wirklich notwendig ist, sich zu überlegen, wenn wir die nachhaltigen Entwicklungsziele der Vereinten Nationen umsetzen wollen, dann würden wir uns viel leichter tun, wenn wir da große Schritte vorwärts gehen. Das SDG 17, die globale Partnerschaft, spricht in 3 Unterzielen auch über technische Transfers, über das Teilen von technischer Innovation. Und ich halte es sehr, sehr wichtig, dass wir auch diese globale Ebene des Digital Divides im Auge haben, damit wir wirklich niemanden zurücklassen, auch außerhalb Europas nicht. Vielen lieben Dank.
I call Mr. Verducci. You have the floor. Microphone, please. Yeah, it's okay.
Grazie Presidente, grazie relatrice Estrela per questo importante lavoro. Colleghi, ciò che affrontiamo in questa risoluzione, cioè la questione del contrasto al divario digitale, è tema dirimente per le nostre società, perché nel tempo che viviamo, quello della incessante e violenta rivoluzione tecnologica digitale, non poter accedere alla rete significa non esistere da un punto di vista sociale. Le piattaforme digitali sono molto più di un mezzo di comunicazione, esse sono la forma sociale totalizzante che ridefinisce il nostro mondo e dentro la quale agisce ogni nostra relazione. E non avere accesso alla rete significa subire esclusione, discriminazione, un muro che impedisce a chi è fuori di realizzare il proprio protagonismo, il proprio progetto di vita, un muro che spesso è fatto della somma di precedenti e stratificate diseguaglianze sociali, economiche, culturali, territoriali, e noi abbiamo il dovere di abbattere questo muro, di contrastare disparità che minano alla base le nostre democrazie. La rete deve diventare un grande bene pubblico e democratico. Oggi non lo è. Per questo serve un piano strategico di investimenti pubblici per portare il digitale nelle aree a fallimento di mercato, per costruire un welfare tecnologico universale imperniato sulla gratuità e sulla accessibilità della rete, sulla cittadinanza digitale come diritto universale. E servono regole per evitare il conflitto tra il potere privato e arbitrario delle multinazionali digitali e le istanze delle nostre società, perché la rete non è neutra e noi dobbiamo fare in modo che a decidere sul nostro destino non siano gli algoritmi, ma la volontà democratica dei parlamenti e dei cittadini. Presidente, durante la pandemia ci siamo drammaticamente resi conto di quanto sia vitale il diritto alla connessione. Presidente, durante la pandemia è aumentato a dismisura il numero dei bambini che vivono in famiglie al di sotto della soglia di povertà. Questi bambini sono quelli più a rischio di esclusione digitale e di conseguenza più a rischio di abbandono scolastico e dunque di perdere il futuro. Non sono a rischio solo classi sociali, generazioni, ma le potenzialità dei nostri paesi e la stessa nostra idea di società. Il divario digitale è un moltiplicatore delle diseguaglianze e questo sarà sempre di più ed è già oggi il cuore della questione sociale che abbiamo di fronte. Ecco perché abbiamo il dovere di intervenire, di portare questo tema nei parlamenti e nel dibattito pubblico per costruire un modello di sviluppo dove tutti possano essere protagonisti. Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Verducci. And now I call Mr. Troy to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Can I firstly compliment the rapporteur for this very comprehensive report? And I note in the report it says that there has been numerous resolutions in this area, and despite this, and at a time of massive acceleration to the digital world, 3.6 billion continue to have no access to the internet, and half of the rural EU have no access to broadband. And that digital divide is based on geography, it's based on a generational divide, socio-economic reasons, and of course gender reasons. And the report quite rightly calls out governments who produce lofty policies in this area without backing up those policies with the necessary resources. And you need the resources in place to ensure the right infrastructure is there, the right regulation is there, and of course to upskill and educate. COVID-19 accelerated the transition to the digital world, and we have a saying in Ireland, necessity is the mother of all inventions. We saw businesses who never had an online presence establish one, because if they didn't, they would have gone out of business. And I welcome the fact that the EU has enacted the Digital Markets Act, which will ensure a level playing field for all digital businesses. We had greater connection with people in the digital world during COVID-19, and of course in the whole area of health. And in the area of health, Ireland plans to have individual electronic health records by 2030. Taking advantage of the positives of digital, we will have treatments faster and more efficiently. But we must not, as more businesses and state services move to the area of digital, we must not forget vulnerable people, and who must be able to access state services, and we must support this by upskilling and educating. And there is very many positives in the whole area of digital, but one area I want to focus on in my last minute is the challenges and the dangers that are out there. And I believe the state is failing in terms of the speed of regulation. There's dominant players out there who have an undue influence. There's no controls on facts or fiction. And Ireland, under the EU Digital Service Act, welcome, late, but we have established an online commissioner who is producing the first online safety codes of practice which are going to be binding. And this will ensure the protection of minors, it will ensure regulation of hate speech and introduce sanctions and penalties for illegal activity. And this is very welcome, but it also raises the question about the need for funding of independent journalism. I think that's critical in any democracy. Finally, the last area I want to focus on is in the area of artificial intelligence. That is moving at such a rate, and the regulation is not keeping up with it. I think as state institutions, we need to ensure that we have much better regulation in this area.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Francis. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable colleagues, in Canada, June is National Indigenous History Month. 2 days ago, on June 21st, we celebrated National Indigenous Peoples Day. These two events are opportunities to honor the distinct cultures, languages, traditions, and histories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, the Indigenous people of what is now Canada. While broadband internet access is critical for the self-determination of Indigenous peoples in Canada, many do not have access to reliable and affordable services. As a result, some Indigenous organizations and communities have established their own service providers and telecommunications networks. And some have implemented projects to improve broadband internet access while addressing community needs. In Canada, there is a strategy to provide high-speed internet to every person by 2030, and there are specific to Indigenous communities. However, the digital divide continues to significantly affect us. The resolution in the rapporteur's report applies to Indigenous peoples in its recognition that access to the internet and the material means required to use it and proficiently in basic digital tools have become fundamental needs, that digital exclusion is a major barrier to equality, and that the lack of access to digital technologies prevents those concerned from accessing public services, education, and many of the opportunities that life has to offer. Indigenous peoples can also relate to the resolution that when it states that people already suffering from inequality and discrimination and struggling to make their voices heard are left even more exposed by the digital divide. While data shows an urban-rural divide in access to broadband internet in Canada, it also shows a significant gap between Indigenous communities located in rural, remote, and urban areas and non-Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by the lack of broadband internet access, which exacerbates existing inequalities in health, employment, and education. Even where broadband internet is available, it is often inaccessible because its price is prohibitive or digital devices are lacking. To advance reconciliation, Canada must work in full partnership with Indigenous peoples to close the digital divide by moving from a logic of 100% digitalization to one of 100% accessibility, as the report recommends all governments do. Walalan, thank you, merci.
Thank you. And now I would like to call Ms. Iordanova.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear Rapporteur, dear colleague, I would like to thank the Rapporteur for the hard work and for the detailed and timely report. I would like, however, to touch upon one specific aspect of the digital divide. Digital technology can be a strong ally in our efforts to close the justice gap. Technology, together with other tools, may increase the ability of isolated individuals to participate in justice proceedings. People who live and work in isolated areas, up in the mountains, in small villages, young entrepreneurs trying to revitalize abandoned areas, people with disabilities, displaced people, etc. Technology can also make it easier for people to access justice outside of business hours or without the additional expense of lawyers or courts. However, all these advantages can easily be turned into a major obstacle to access to justice. Infrastructure and internet services may be inconsistent or unreliable. The cost of the system may be passed on to the user, creating barriers to access to justice for those who are unable to pay. Online system cannot be available for those who live in rural, remote locations. Access to justice is the core guarantee of all our fundamental pillars of our democratic family: human rights, democracy, and rule of law. I am a strong advocate for rapid modernization of our society, digitalization of not just the business practices, but of the public services as well. But I also know, I've seen it with my eyes, that it is often the case that those who need justice the most have the least access to the digital world. They have no internet, no computer, no digital skills. Therefore, we should not allow at any moment any wide opening of the digital divide. Holding back the justice system from stepping up in the digital world is not the answer. The answer is to empower and give support to those who are behind. We must ensure well-defined, practical, and financially supported comprehensive policies that support the development of digital competencies, guarantee access to internet, and provide reliable infrastructure, which includes not only the technical means, but the additional help if such is needed. I will support the resolution, and I urge you to combine our efforts to ensure equal access to digital public services for all in the upcoming digital era. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I call Lord Griffiths to take the floor.
How does this go on? Ah, ça va? Oui. Bon. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair, and colleagues who have had the courage and stamina to remain this long in the House. I sit on a committee in the House of Lords, a select committee. The genius is it's bipartisan, and it consists of experts in their field. And the committee I sit on is for communications and digital. Our last report was called Regulating the Regulators. The current one, nearly complete, is on digital exclusion. And the one we're about to begin will be on artificial intelligence. We attract people from every field of life, experts in their field, and we interview them and cross-question them before we publish our report. It's a very excellent way of making sure these subjects remain in the public domain and subject to scrutiny. One of the two things that we've discovered in our debates has been that it would be very wrong to limit exclusion, digital exclusion, to the poor, although we recognize that area of need, or the old. We had a story about an old man, called an old man by his son, but he's just my age, and I feel very young. But not just for old people. We heard that young people, we always assume that they're adept, they know what they're doing, it's at their fingertips, but the band of experience across which they exercise their skills is very narrow. They're very good with their phones and with their Spotify and entertainment and so on, but the application of those skills to work-related tasks can be very limited. And so I don't know what the clock is doing, but as a Welshman, I'm perfectly capable of speaking for another hour, if that's allowed. I'll just carry on, shall I? Good. So we must be careful that we don't exclude youngsters from the recognition that they need enlarging their skills and broadening their experience. Similarly, another tale, not my father, but my wife, she worked in the field of radiography. She was highly skilled on the computer in taking the findings of physics and applying them to medical needs for people suffering from cancer. She was brilliant at it. But when she retired, all that skill on the computer was of no good to her at all, because now she wanted to write a book, now she wanted to do some study, and she needed to upskill herself. With this technology, we need constantly throughout our lives to be improving our skills, broadening them, because the technology is improving, but also the fields of endeavor when work is no longer monochrome from birth to retirement need to be updated too. So I thank the rapporteur for her report and wish her well and the Assembly well going forward.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Segano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues, this report is critical as the digital divide and the inequalities it creates currently affected millions of people around Europe. Addressing the gap between those who have access to and use information and communication technologies and those who do not is key to securing a fairer and more equitable society. Concrete actions can and should be taken, such as expanding infrastructure to cover all areas and improving connectivity speed to enable new uses of internet, reducing the cost of connections and devices for vulnerable and geographically distant populations, promoting digital literacy programs for different groups, especially women, youth, elderly, and people with disabilities, encouraging, innovating, and inclusive uses for social good, such as e-government, e-learning, e-health, and e-commerce. Strengthening national policies through better coordination between different administrative levels and adjusting the regulatory framework. Fostering international cooperation and solidarity to share best practices and resources. The digital divide has serious consequences for individuals and society as a whole. It affects people's opportunities for education and employment, health, participation and empowerment. It also hinders social cohesion, economic development and environmental sustainability. Dear colleagues, reducing the digital divide will allow us to leverage the potential of the digital revolution and strengthen democracy, human rights, and social justice worldwide. It is both our responsibility and our opportunity to make this happen. I congratulate the rapporteur for her excellent work in this report and this recommendation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. And now I call Madam Fresco-Rolfo. You have the floor.
Merci Madame la Vice-présidente. Pour commencer, je souhaitais remercier Madame Estrela pour la qualité de ce rapport. Chère Edith, je partage chaque mot qui y figure. Chers collègues, comme l'évoque ce rapport, si les technologies numériques ont offert de formidables opportunités dans de nombreux domaines, elles ont aussi créé des inégalités qu'il nous faut veiller à réduire. Si je prends la parole aujourd'hui devant vous, c'est pour évoquer un enjeu primordial qui requiert l'attention de tous, l'inclusion numérique des personnes en situation de handicap. Dans nos sociétés, si une grande majorité des démarches administratives ont été facilitées par le développement du numérique, elles ont laissé à la traîne non seulement beaucoup de personnes âgées, mais aussi et surtout des personnes en situation de handicap. L'évolution fulgurante de ces outils provoque l'exclusion de ces mêmes personnes et nous devons toutes et tous trouver des moyens de les réintégrer. Les obstacles auxquels les personnes en situation de handicap vont être confrontées, que leur handicap soit physique, sensoriel, intellectuel ou psychosocial, sont divers. Les formulaires à remplir en ligne sont souvent inaccessibles malgré la volonté affichée des autorités de les rendre accessibles. Au handicap, nous ajoutons un obstacle technologique. Un gros effort pour rendre les sites web, leur contenu et les diverses applications accessibles à tous doit être fait afin de ne laisser personne sur le bord du chemin. Il faut que les États investissent dans des technologies pour développer de nouveaux outils facilitant l'inclusion numérique des personnes en situation de handicap, comme par exemple des commandes vocales, oculaires et tactiles. Une fois n'est pas coutume, nous ne pourrions rien faire sans qu'une formation au numérique adaptée soit mise en place pour aider et faciliter l'utilisation de ces outils. Éducation et formation sont décidément les mots les plus utilisés dans tous les travaux de l'Assemblée. Avant de terminer, je souhaite préciser que je soutiens pleinement les amendements oraux qui seront présentés à la fin du débat pour intégrer davantage cette perspective dans le projet de résolution. Je remercie les signataires, ainsi que Mme Estrela, pour leur coopération efficace là-dessus. Peut-être faudrait-il que l'Assemblée se saisisse de ce sujet vaste et fondamental et y consacre un rapport spécifique. Bien entendu, je souhaiterais que nous œuvrions tous ensemble pour promouvoir l'inclusion numérique des personnes en situation de handicap et ainsi réduire la fracture numérique qu'ils subissent. Il en va de notre responsabilité collective. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. And now I call Mr. Savickas. You have the floor.
Madam Speaker, dear colleagues, before coming to Strasbourg, I booked my flight and my hotel on a website. On my way here, I was actually checking news very regularly. And during this week, while actually being physically in France, I did actually engage with the most pressing matters back home in Lithuania. And all of that is thanks to ever-present access to internet and digital skills which I have acquired. But to know that not all of us have the same access to learn, to study, to connect with people, it seems unacceptable. And the report, rightfully so, brings attention to all the types of divides in the digital area. It is because of disability divide, it is because of social divide, because of generational divide, even gender or geographical reasons. It is the divide that we must seek to demolish. And the numbers are not lying. International Telecommunications Union estimates that globally there are about 250 million fewer women online than men, and that's 250 million. Therefore, it is more than clear that digital divide is actually becoming the face of inequality of 21st century. So let's be real. If we do not reduce divide now, the gap is going to get even bigger. We are at a crossroad. It is either we continue as it is or harness these technologies to build safer and more sustainable future for all. And the current pace of technological developments and new developments ongoing only proves that we must adopt the positions and solutions proposed by the rapporteur. Digital transition cannot take place without state support. This is why free public Wi-Fi hotspots must be widely available, why concession rates must be available for those who cannot afford it. Furthermore, public authorities have special responsibility when they themselves set the bar for digitizing public services. And in this regard, such platforms as PICS, Digital Competences Platform, enable students and workers to test their digital competences and gain new ones. And these can really play a very important part. And recently, in this very building, there has been a significant progress towards closing the divide by the Conference on the Future of Europe. It has been established that internet should be considered as a human right. And today, we can take further steps towards it by actually approving the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I call Ms. Hernandez Ramos. I see she's ready, so you have the floor.
Saludo a Europa con mucho cariño mexicano. En un mundo cada vez más interconectado, donde la tecnología se ha convertido en un elemento fundamental de nuestra sociedad, es nuestro deber asegurar que todos los individuos tengamos las mismas oportunidades de participar plenamente en la economía y la vida cotidiana. La desigualdad en el acceso y utilización de tecnologías digitales es una realidad que afecta a millones de personas en todo el mundo. En México, el promedio de usuarios de tecnologías digitales es de casi 82% en zonas urbanas y del 56% en zonas rurales, pero la brecha entre las diversas entidades es profunda, pues mientras en Ciudad de México el promedio alcanza el 88%, en Tlaxcala, mi estado, es de apenas el 71%. Esta brecha digital tiene profundas implicaciones para la igualdad de oportunidades, el desarrollo socioeconómico y la cohesión social. Las tecnologías digitales tienen el poder de fortalecer la democracia y facilitar el acceso a la información y fomentar la participación de los ciudadanos en la toma de decisiones, por lo que es fundamental que las políticas y las iniciativas se centren en empoderar a las personas, promover la transparencia y garantizar la privacidad y la seguridad en línea. Los esfuerzos para cerrar la brecha digital no serán efectivos sin el compromiso sostenido de los estados. Cerrar esta brecha no solamente es garantizar la igualdad de acceso, sino promover la inclusión y la participación ciudadana. El llamado que hace esta Asamblea Parlamentaria para considerar prioritario el combate a la brecha digital debe ser atendido por todos los Estados miembros, siendo fundamental que se aborden los aspectos infraestructurales, así como los socioeconómicos y los educativos. Por ello, debemos garantizar que todas las personas tengan acceso a una conectividad de calidad y asequible. La infraestructura de banda ancha debe ser ampliada y mejorada, especialmente en áreas donde la conectividad es escasa. Además, deben implementarse políticas que promuevan la competencia y reduzcan los costos de acceso a Internet para acercarlo a todos. También debemos abordar la falta de habilidades digitales que impiden a muchas personas aprovechar plenamente las oportunidades que brindan estas tecnologías digitales. Se requiere desarrollar programas de capacitación para cerrar la brecha entre generaciones, entre zonas rurales y garantizar que los adultos puedan también beneficiarse de las tecnologías. Es crucial que se realicen esfuerzos para reducir la brecha socioeconómica y garantizar que los grupos vulnerables, como personas de bajos ingresos, migrantes, personas con discapacidad y adultos mayores, tengan acceso a las tecnologías digitales y a los servicios en línea. Cerrar la brecha digital requiere una acción coordinada a nivel nacional e internacional y un compromiso firme por parte de gobiernos, organizaciones internacionales, sector privado, sociedad civil. Y al hacerlo, estaremos promoviendo la igualdad de oportunidades y construyendo un futuro más inclusivo y equitativo para todos. Es cuanto.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Rayonen. You have the floor.
Thank you. Digitalization has made life easier. Everybody knows this. But not everyone can use digitalization. A large part of people is still without digitalization. Advice and teaching about digitalization is needed. Advice must be reliable and understandable. Medical information is digital. Not everyone has a computer at home. I think municipalities, cities, hospitals, and maybe pharmacies could help people. Pharmacies are important places. People think that pharmacies could advise on digitalization. Finland had an election a couple of months ago. The government program has just been completed. According to the government program, pharmacy could help more people. I think the pharmacy has expertise should be able to use digitalization safety. But how do we ensure that everyone is advised? I mean everyone. Is it very important to develop this and monitor the situation now and future? Thank you.
Thank you. And the next and the last speaker for this debate is Mr. Mutka. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'ai l'honneur d'être le dernier orateur pour ce rapport. Je voudrais sincèrement remercier Madame Edith Estrella pour ce rapport, mais aussi pour tout le travail qu'elle fait à l'Assemblée générale, qui a une cohérence en termes de lutte contre les discriminations, de lutte pour des droits sociaux. Alors, beaucoup de mes collègues ont raconté une histoire. Alors, je voulais aussi vous raconter une histoire. C'est la terrible histoire en fait de la Belgique et de beaucoup de pays qui a subi une catastrophe naturelle en 2021, puisque des inondations mortelles ont frappé la Belgique, mais aussi l'Allemagne. Et pendant ces inondations, certains citoyens, ou la plupart des citoyens, ont reçu des alertes sur leur téléphone portable qui les prévenaient d'une inondation imminente ou d'une montée des eaux. Le problème, on le connaît, et c'est l'objet de ce rapport, c'est que certains citoyens n'avaient tout simplement pas de GSM pour recevoir ce genre de messages d'alerte. Ça a été aussi le cas en Turquie, la Turquie que j'ai pu visiter après le séisme. On s'est rendu compte que finalement l'accès à l'information numérique n'était pas ouvert à tous, notamment aux personnes précarisées. Souvent, c'est aussi les femmes qui ont moins accès à toute une série de services numériques, et on voit donc l'impact que ça peut avoir, le lien entre catastrophes naturelles et fractures numériques, et la discrimination qui peut aussi être subie à ce moment-là. Alors on le sait, le développement numérique, c'est à la fois une immense transformation de nos sociétés, c'est une incroyable possibilité de développement, mais c'est aussi un facteur d'exacerbation des injustices et par ailleurs un danger pour l'environnement si il n'est pas maîtrisé. On sait que le numérique a un impact notamment sur les émissions de CO2, mais c'est aussi sur les composantes numériques qui par ailleurs sont souvent cherchées dans des pays où les droits humains, les droits des enfants ne sont pas respectés. C'est des données qu'on doit pouvoir avoir en tête. Alors je remercie Mme Estrela parce que son rapport montre finalement qu'il y a une préoccupation ou une importance de cette fracture numérique qui a tendance à augmenter, et que ces inégalités finalement d'accès, elles ne cessent de s'accroître. Alors de quoi parle-t-on ? Imaginez un peu une personne isolée qui, à l'heure où la Poste vous propose des services numériques, ne peut pas se rendre justement sur Internet. Imaginez un jeune qui souhaite étudier pendant le Covid et qui partage un appartement et un seul ordinateur avec toute sa famille. Imaginez une personne en recherche d'emploi qui ne peut pas se payer un abonnement Internet, mais à qui on demande d'aller chercher du travail uniquement sur Internet. Imaginez une personne sans papier, une personne migrante qui doit déposer sa demande d'asile avec une plateforme numérique et qui ne peut pas le faire puisque, par définition, elle a très souvent pas accès à un ordinateur ou à un GSM. Donc tout ça nous montre que finalement, le numérique doit aller vers un accès universel, un accès de qualité, un accès stable, un accès gratuit. Mais je pense que, je vais reprendre les propos de ma collègue Madame Marat, je pense que le numérique nous montre aussi que toute une série de citoyens n'est pas connecté à Internet, mais le numérique déconnecte aussi les citoyens. Et je voudrais aussi aujourd'hui dire qu'on doit bien sûr conserver ce lien humain qu'il y a entre les gens. Une personne âgée qui doit maintenant faire ses démarches administratives par Internet, c'est une personne âgée qui s'isole. Et je tiens vraiment à dire que c'est ça le plus important, c'est de garder ce lien important. Ma grand-mère n'ira pas sur le métaverse, de même que moi par ailleurs. Et je pense que c'est vraiment ça qui doit nous guider aussi, le lien humain dans notre travail à l'Assemblée qui est primordial. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Mutka. And I would like to remind to the members of the Assembly that speeches of members on speakers list who have been present during the debate but not have been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that written text can be submitted electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. And now I call Ms. Estrela, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Tout d'abord, je remercie les intervenants pour ce débat très participé et très intéressant. Et je remercie aussi les collègues qui ont présenté des amendements au projet de résolution. Et bien sûr, je remercie le secrétariat et particulièrement Sarah Barton par son soutien tout au long du processus de préparation de mon rapport. Chers collègues, l'exclusion numérique désigne l'inégalité dans l'accès à Internet et au TIC qui affecte 52% des femmes et 42% des hommes du monde. Ce fracture se creuse encore plus quand on parle des régions. Selon des données extraites du portail Internet World Stats, en décembre 2021, en Afrique, seuls 43% de ses habitants vivent connectés, contre 88% des Européens et 93% des Nord-Américains. Pour réduire la fracture numérique, il faut mettre en œuvre des politiques publiques qui garantissent un accès universel et abordable à l'Internet IoT, qui favorisent l'éducation et la formation aux compétences numériques tout au long de la vie, qui encouragent l'innovation et la création de contenus locaux adaptés aux besoins et aux intérêts des populations. La fracture numérique est un défi majeur pour le siècle XXI. Il faut le combler pour construire une société plus juste, plus inclusive et plus durable. Chers collègues, ce que je viens de mentionner a été généré par Bing, une plateforme d'intelligence artificielle. Il y a ceux qui disent que nous sommes confrontés à un admirable nouveau monde. Mais il y a aussi ceux qui disent que l'admirable nouveau monde pourrait être un cauchemar après tout. Il est de notre responsabilité de choisir la voie et de ne pas laisser les algorithmes et l'intelligence artificielle de déterminer nos vies et conditionner la démocratie. Je vous remercie de votre attention et j'espère compter sur votre soutien et sur votre vote également. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Estrela. And does chairperson of the committee wish to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. What a great file to finalize our summer part sessions, colleagues. And this is so brilliant that we have young people, business people, people who are actually electing us to be voting for these important files and to discuss these issues today. You know, on behalf of the committee, I would like to say that this file has been very properly prepared and supported by the Secretariat, supported by the committee already in April. And you know, a funny thing just happened. My internet ran out, and I couldn't access the family messages because, you know, we have a grandma who is trying to use the digital issues to see the photographs, because now the war of aggression spread us all across the country, but we try to be united. So starting from the fact that you have access to air raid sirens to go in the bomb shelter, which was also mentioned by our colleagues, to the registry of the newborn baby, receiving birth certificate, getting married, getting divorced, apply for the subsidies, apply for schooling, etc. This all can be done digitally in various member states of the Assembly. Estonia was pioneering these processes. Now Ukraine has a great Ministry of Digital supporting these issues via the application DIA, which means action. Colleagues, without very appropriate approach, as Madam Rapporteur, Madam Estrela put it very, very accurately, we have to focus on the accessibility, not the numbers first. Surely, if we provide with the tablets all the children across the member states who are lacking the technological access, that would not necessarily bring the positive effects, because there is indeed a threat inside, and this is the disinformation. And our previous reports have been focusing on that as well. Colleagues, the daily life is bringing us to opportunities and at the same time to the threats. And of course, we can link it to the people in need, the people who are now experiencing migration and fleeing crises, and people with disabilities of different gender, different age, and they're coming from different member states. We have indicated with you that that was the most massive movement of persons since the Second World War. And Madam Estrela was also focusing in her report on on digital literacy. In your concrete examples, you have indicated that it doesn't matter how old you are, you have to have a digital literacy, and indeed international donors can provide this access, can support financially these programs, and this is the actual, let's say, result of our report. Surely within the Madame Estrella's text we see the excellency of having the digital divide, as she indicated recently, between two genders, men and women. But I think there is so much more to say that we can during the 3 minutes or 10-minute speech. That's why I want to inform you, dear colleagues, that the committee adopted the report of Madame Estrella's draft resolution already in April. I want to congratulate her again, and I think we did our best to get the presidency of the Assembly in a maximum to have the votes of support. Thank you, Madam Estrela, for your brilliant work, and thank you to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And now I declare the debate is closed, and we come to consideration of amendments to the draft resolution. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution to which 4 amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination wishes to propose the Assembly the amendments 3 and 4 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the Committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Ms. Maria Mazentseva?
Yes, Madam President.
Does anyone object? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. I don't see any objections. I have received an oral amendment from Ms. Estrela, which reads as follows. In the draft resolution, at the end of paragraph 6, add the following sentence, as it can prove particularly difficult for some children with disabilities to follow online education, states must provide the tools and mechanisms necessary to ensure that these children enjoy equal and unhindered access to such education, particularly in times of crisis. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy, or conciliation, and if there is no opposition from 10 or more members to it, being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of the Rule 34.7.8. Is there any oppositions to the amendment being debated? I don't see objections. So this is not the case. I therefore call Ms. Estrela to support the oral amendment. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. I am in favor because it was approved in our committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? I don't see any objections. The committee is obviously in favor. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The oral amendment is agreed to, so Amendment 1 is rejected. I have received an oral amendment from Ms. Estrela, which reads as follows. In the draft resolution, after paragraph 9.5, insert the following paragraph. Remove any obstacles that prevent some children with disabilities from enjoying equal access to education when the latter is based on digital tools and technologies. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy, or conciliation, and there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7.8. 4.7.a. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? I don't see any objections, so that's not the case. I therefore call Ms. Estrella to support the oral amendment.
I am in favor. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against oral amendment? I see no objections. Or are there any objections? No. The committee is obviously in favor. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The oral amendment is agreed to, so Amendment 2 falls. And we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15776 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 15776 as amended is adopted. Congratulations. Unanimously.
Dear colleagues, our next business is to consider the changes proposed in the membership of committees. These are set out in document Commissions 2023-06, revised addendum number 2, are the proposed changes in the membership of the Assembly's committees agreed to. Don't see any objections, and they are agreed to. Next item on today's agenda is the continuation of the debate on the progress report of the Bureau and the Standing Committee. At its meeting this morning, the Bureau has proposed several references to committees. They are set out in document 15791, addendum number 3. These references must be submitted for ratification by the Assembly in accordance with Rule 26.3. Are there any objections against these references? I do not see any. They are approved. I now propose that the other decisions in the progress report be ratified. Are there any objections? I do not see any. They are approved. We now, dear colleagues, come to the end of our business. I would like to thank all the members, particularly the rapporteurs of the committees, for their hard work during the part session. I would also like to thank the vice presidents who chaired during this part session, Madam Sibyl Aslan, Madam Edith Estrella, Mr. John Howell, Mr. Darko Kawewski, Madam Olena Komenko, Madam Ingrid Skau, Madam Tamara Vonta, and Madam Maja Vukovic. I would also like to thank the staff and the interpreters, both permanent and temporary, who have worked hard to make the part session a success. Could I ask, at the end of this meeting, is there anybody of you for who this is the last session to participate in? I see one. I see one. To the left you see Mr. Bob van Pareren. That is not exactly his political position in the spectrum, I think he agrees, but he has served this assembly for several years. He was always here. And I would like to thank him, and with him all those others for whom this was their last session, for the great work that they did to make this assembly a relevant assembly. Bob and all the others, thank you very much. The fourth part session of the 2023 session will be held from the 9th to the 13th of October of this year. I declare the third part session of the 2023 session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe closed. I would like to remind members to return their voting cards to the dedicated box at the entrance to the chamber before leaving the Palais. The sitting is closed.